There are tons of weird things on Mars. Spoons, noodles, doors, even faces. Are they all really just rocks? Besides, it's not the only planet in our solar system full of mysterious things. Let's check them out. Recently, we found a strange thing on Mars that looks like a smooth, spoon-like object. It grabbed everyone's attention after NASA's Curiosity rover spotted it. The rock, with a handle and rounded tip, looks like it's floating in the rover's photo. People on the internet are puzzled about what it might be. Some are joking that it's a Martian's bowling pin, or even a shoehorn left by extraterrestrial creatures. But Andrew Good from NASA says it's not that exciting. Turns out it's just a rock shaped by the wind over a long time. These kinds of rocks with odd shapes are common on Mars. They're called ventifacts. Ventifact is a rock that can get scratched, dented, or smoothed out by tiny particles carried by the wind. You'll usually find these kinds of rocks in dry places where there's not much grass or trees to block the wind, and where there's a lot of sand blowing around. Sometimes, the wind can carve ventifacts into really cool shapes, like the mushroom rocks you can see in the White Desert National Park in Egypt. These rocks look like giant mushrooms because the wind wears away the bottom part faster than the top, making them stand tall and slim. Ventifacts aren't the only cool Martian rocks. Check out this series of surreal spikes protruding from the red surface. NASA's Curiosity rover stumbled upon them while exploring the Gale crater on Mars. They quickly caught everyone's attention. Twisting structures resembling spikes looked like some extraterrestrial doors. Even the SETI Institute, an organization focused on searching for extraterrestrial life, tweeted about the image, referring to it as a cool rock. But in reality, these are just hoodoos. These tall and thin spires occur when hard rock sits atop softer rock layers. Martian spikes are likely cemented fillings of ancient fractures in sedimentary rock, with softer material eroded away over time. Again, there are many hoodoos on Earth too. They're also called fairy chimneys or tent rocks. You can find them in places like Utah's Bryce Canyon and the Colorado Plateau. NASA is excited about these weird structures because they can help us learn more about the history of the Gale crater. There was also a rock that looked like a jelly donut. We called this rock Pinnacle Island. It was spotted by NASA's cameras. However, just 4 days earlier, it was nowhere to be seen. So how did it magically disappear? In a very anticlimactic way, it was kicked up by one of Opportunity's wheels as it traversed the Martian terrain. But there's still some mystery surrounding that jelly donut. Analysis revealed that Pinnacle Island contains unusually high levels of sulfur and manganese. Both of these things are water-soluble. In other words, there might have been some water action that created these elements in the rock. So this tiny thing suddenly caused a lot of drama, and an entire lawsuit against NASA. It claimed that the agency failed to investigate a possible fungus growing on Mars. Jelly donut fungus. But not all our findings are natural. Another puzzling discovery was this thing the Perseverance rover spotted. It's something that looks like tangled spaghetti or string. Just like the donut, this mysterious object showed up in a rover camera image and then vanished from the sandy ground in several days. It turns out that it could be debris from the rover's landing system. Perseverance landed in the Jezero crater in February 2021. It had a rough landing and accidentally scattered debris around. Some of these debris pieces have been showing up in the rover's images for a while now. The string-like object is likely a piece of shredded Dacron netting, which is a type of fiber used in thermal blankets. These blankets help regulate equipment temperatures during the super hot process of landing on Mars. It probably underwent significant unraveling and shredding due to strong forces during the landing. Thermal blankets lost a bunch of stuff back then. For example, this shiny foil piece spotted in June. The rover found it on a rock. What's remarkable is how far some of the debris has traveled. The rover landed about 1.2 miles away from where it's currently exploring. It's probably because the crash threw the debris into the air, and the Martian winds carried it over such a distance. Mars is known for its strong winds, which can move lightweight objects. However, while it's fun to stumble upon them on images, there are concerns about the debris and trash on Mars. We haven't even fixed this problem on Earth, and we're already creating it on Mars. The debris we left on the red planet is already accumulating in an area called Hogwallow Flats. Plus, the debris can accidentally contaminate the sample tubes used for collecting Martian rocks. So far, NASA isn't overly worried about this, but they're keeping a close eye on it to prevent any issues with the rovers. Now, how about not things, but animals? Curiosity caused quite a stir when it captured something that looked like a rat on Mars. Some started speculating that it could be evidence of indigenous Martian life, or even that this rodent was brought along by Curiosity. But the Mars rat, once again, turned out to be just a weird rock. It looked interesting because of the natural processes like wind erosion and mechanical abrasion. We also found some worm-looking things. Curiosity snapped a picture of a formation that looks like worms wriggling across the Martian landscape. Despite its tiny size, this formation stands out with its unique shape and rough texture. It's probably made of durable material resistant to Mars's harsh erosion. And finally, our top mysterious finding is the face on Mars. Cydonia is a region on Mars that has captured both scientific and popular interest. It's located in Mars's northern hemisphere. It lies between heavily cratered regions to the south and relatively smooth plains to the north. There's a theory that the northern plains may have once been ocean beds. Maybe Cydonia was once a coastal zone. This place is full of interesting and beautiful features that tell us a lot about the history of the Red Planet. But its most interesting feature was the Martian face. This thing gained widespread attention when it was snapped by the Viking 1 orbiter in 1976. Some believed that it was evidence of a long-lost Martian civilization. At first, NASA dismissed it as a trick of light and shadow. But after some analysis, it turned out to be, yep, another rock. We also saw a face of a bear. It was captured by the high-resolution imaging experiment camera. In an image, we can see a circular fracture pattern that looks like a bear's head, with two craters forming the eyes and a V-shaped collapse structure like the nose. The head likely formed because something heavy settled on top of an old hole in the ground. This hole was filled with either lava or mud. The nose-like feature is speculated to be a volcanic or mud vent. But why do we keep seeing these strange things on Mars? Sometimes our brains can trick us into seeing things like faces or objects in rocks and other things. But these are just illusions called pareidolia. Pareidolia is a psychological phenomenon that makes us see familiar patterns or shapes, especially faces, where none actually exist. It's because the brain encounters something it doesn't recognize or understand right away. It tries to find things that look the most like this one. So it sees random patterns, textures, or sounds as something meaningful and recognizable. That's why a chair and clothes on it seems like a super creepy human-like figure at night. It also causes you to see faces or shapes in clouds, or hear recognizable sounds and even words in random noise. It's a fascinating proof of the power of our perception, but we also should be careful with it and not let our imagination run wild. How many people do we need to create a new civilization? And not on Earth, but on Mars, and in limited conditions. And if we create this colony and send them off, what problems will they face? How can they survive that far away from home without any support? A recent scientific study sheds light on these questions, so let's take a look at it. Alright, so you want to colonize Mars, right? Well, it's not an easy task. Mars is the fourth most distant planet from the Sun and the seventh largest in the solar system. This lonely red guy is very similar to our Earth. Moreover, before it became a boundless desert, it could well have even looked like Earth now. Millions of years ago, there was water, oceans, plants, and who knows, maybe even life. It would be nice to put all these cool things back there. No wonder we've been talking about colonization of this planet for a very long time. Now, SpaceX claims that their proposed interplanetary spacecraft could deliver 100 people to Mars. The owner of the company, billionaire Elon Musk, talked about creating a fleet that could provide a constant flow of resources to Mars. But how realistic are all these fantasies? Actually, not very much. Before sending people to Mars, we need to solve a number of issues. For example, the incredible radiation exposure, toxic soil, low gravity, low temperatures, and all sorts of other nasty things. And this is just the beginning. It will take at least a couple of decades to create a vehicle that can actually successfully land on Mars and return back. But let's do a thought experiment and imagine that we finally decided to colonize Mars. How will things turn out? Recently, scientists published a new study on this topic. This study is called Minimum Number of Settlers for Survival on Another Planet. The author is Jean-Marc Salati, professor at the National Polytechnic Institute of Bordeaux in France. His article was published in the Scientific Reports journal. As you might have guessed, the study was trying to find out how we could colonize another planet. How many resources do we need? How should this colony live? What kind of work should they do? And how long will it take? And, of course, exactly how many people do we need for all of this? Let's try to answer that. Now, imagine that we've moved into a wonderful future. Well, not really. A terrible future, actually. In his study, Salati suggested that life on Earth was threatened by some catastrophic event, so the only way for humanity to survive is to go to Mars or some other planet. In this imaginary scenario, unfortunately, the supply delivery from Earth was interrupted, or even gone. Now, the colony has to support itself somehow. Well, here's where we already stumble upon a bunch of problems. For example, we're not sure how well the people in the colony will work together. Hey! Will they communicate with each other like normal human beings? Will they share their time and resources as they should? Humans are constantly ruining things for other humans. I can even bet that it was their fault we had to flee to Mars. But even if we forget about that, how about organizational issues? What equipment do we have? What will we use to extract resources? What skills would we need? You know what? Who cares? In our case, these things don't matter. All that we know is that the colony doesn't have a lot of initial resources and equipment, and the human factor is absolutely unpredictable. So the chances of survival are pretty low, but we need to survive somehow. In this case, Salati describes two things that will have a huge impact on our survival. These things are essentially variables in a mathematical equation. The first one is the availability of local resources. Basically, it means water, oxygen, and all sorts of useful chemical elements. These resources should be somehow mined and easy to use. Fortunately, we're not starting from scratch. We already know a lot about Mars. What resources are there? How can they be used for life support, agriculture, and industrial production? The colony is lucky because all this has been studied at various seminars and published in reports and books over the past years. Thanks to this, we know what will be available to our colony. For example, we know that gases could be extracted from the atmosphere and minerals from the soil. On Mars, we could provide such things as iron, glass, and even organic compounds. The most important problem here is the service life of the equipment that our new Martians start with. They'll have to get as many materials as possible before the tools break. Keeping them in good condition will be almost the most important task. The second thing is the production capacity, or the speed of work. We have a specific list of things we need to do, make some tools for example, and all this must be produced in sufficient quantities before the literal deadlines. Salati says that the most important thing here will be the so-called sharing factor. Imagine one person trying to survive on Mars. They would have to do all the tasks on their own. They would need to find or build their own system for supplying drinking water, oxygen, and electricity generation. We've already seen how this played out in the movie The Martian. This task wasn't easy at all. There's always not enough time, and all of this is just too much for one person to handle. Unless you're Matt Damon, of course. So, surprisingly, we need a fairly large colony. This significantly distributes the burden. Each person spends less effort, gets tired less, and as a result, the efficiency and speed of work grow. This is where the sharing factor comes into play. Now we need to calculate this number. If we want, for example, to build something, how many people do we need to do this quickly and efficiently? How can we optimize the work as much as possible? Well, it depends on the needs of these people, on available resources, random things like weather, and so on. But in general, this number can be estimated and calculated using some mathematical functions. Salati tells in more detail about these functions in his article. You can read it yourself if you're interested, but in general, he describes 5 areas that need to be taken into account when calculating this number. These areas are ecosystem management, energy production, industry, buildings, and the human factor. The human factor includes such things as the upbringing and education of children, sports, games, music, and so on. In the end, it all comes down to 2 things: how much time we have and how well the people in the colony will work with each other. So, what was the result of all these calculations? In the end, Salati found out that we would need at least 110 people to successfully survive on Mars. This is the minimal number needed to create a self-sufficient civilization. And it will be better if we don't take too many people with us. The more people we take on the spacecraft, the more difficult it will be to predict the results. After all, as we've already said, humans are always ruining things for other humans. So it's better to stick with about 110 people. Of course, this is a rough estimate, and there are a bunch of different assumptions and uncertainties, but even this number is already very useful. Now the scientists know how many people is a minimum for colonization of another planet. Colonizing other planets is a very complex issue, and it will take us a very long time to resolve it. It's very unlikely that we'll fly to Mars in the near future. This task may take several decades, or even a century. Therefore, the best solution would be to try our best to save Earth until we can begin to conquer other planets.
It seems like NASA and China are each planning to send humans to Mars. Both space agencies have tentative plans to launch the first crewed missions by 2033, right when Mars and Earth are playing a game of tag. And that's not all. Other missions may happen in 2035, 2037, and beyond. The ultimate goal is to build a Mars habitat for future exploration and research. So, how are they going to do that? Well, let's find out. Now, traveling to Mars isn't as easy as hopping on a rocket. The distance between our planets can change a lot over time, ranging from around 35 million miles to 250 million miles. And even with our best technology, it takes 6 to 9 months just to get to the red planet. So, a round trip to Mars could mean spending 3 years away from Earth, dealing with extra radiation and floating around in microgravity. But NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has some exciting news. Scientists have been working tirelessly to design a minimal architecture mission to Mars. They're thinking that 2033 is the perfect year to make it happen. So here's the deal. Every 15 years, the rocky planets, Venus, Mars, and Earth, align just right to create a cosmic sweet spot. The mission will make the most of this rare alignment and perform an epic gravity assist maneuver using Venus. It's like getting a boost from a planetary slingshot. We'll speed up our spacecraft and reduce the need for making our own propulsion. The report also talked about some really cool ideas, like using nuclear power for spacecraft engines and using Martian resources to make things. These technologies could make space travel faster, protect astronauts from radiation, and make it easier to live in space. They might even let us make resources and fuel right on Mars. So this is how the plan goes down. First, we'll launch a spacecraft towards Mars. It'll spend around 30 days in high orbit, exploring and gathering valuable data. Then it's going to head back to Earth, also swinging by Venus for a quick visit. So this whole adventure will last approximately 570 days, which is just 1.6 years. And a shorter adventure means less exposure to radiation. Now keep in mind, this mission will focus on orbiting Mars rather than landing on its surface. It's just a stepping stone, paving the way for future landing missions. Just like Apollo 8 mission orbited the Moon before Apollo 11's historic landing. Landing on Mars by 2033 might be a bit too ambitious due to funding constraints, but who knows? If all goes smoothly, it could become a reality. Now for the coolest part. We don't need fancy new technologies or vehicles for all this. We'll make use of existing ones that are already in production or being studied for the Artemis Moon program. Now let's break down our Mars mission vehicle, a big puzzle of many parts. And guess what? It was put together by a community of space enthusiasts back in 2017. That's right, it wasn't the scientists who produced it first. But now, this isn't just some fantastic idea anymore. Most of these things are already becoming a reality, being made or planned by NASA. So let's take a look at this concept. First, we have the Orion spacecraft. This is the spaceship that will take the crew to the orbit around Earth and bring them safely back home. It's like a super fancy space taxi, and it might be the most powerful taxi to ever exist. It's combined with 3 powerful propulsion stages, and we're also using a special fuel that doesn't need to be ultra cold like in the movies. Next, there's the Earth departure stage. This is an important part of the mission. It helps us make a powerful thrust that sends us on our way to Mars. Then we have Mars transit habitat. This is where the crew will live and hang out during their journey to Mars. Like a cozy space house with all the things they need to be comfortable. And finally, the Mars orbit insertion stage. When we reach Mars, this awesome thing will help us slow down and enter its orbit smoothly. It's our maneuvering expert. Even the Mars transit habitat is being developed and might even be tested in a few years. That means we're on track to have the whole thing ready for our amazing Mars mission by 2033. In other words, it's all about working with what we've got and making it happen. Now, let's talk about the plan's timeline. Mid-2028, the action begins. First, we'll need to do a couple of test flights. We'll send 2 stages ahead of time to make sure we can come back to Earth safely. These stages will join together like 2 spaceships becoming best buddies. They'll orbit the red planet and then come home. To do all that, we'll use powerful rockets and 13 commercial launches. It's going to be a huge space party. Late 2032. After all that, we launch the fully assembled Mars mission vehicle to high Earth orbit. So far, this is an empty vehicle that awaits astronauts. If all is good, then it'll be ready for the final check. March 2033. Time for our brave crew and their Orion spacecraft to join the party. We launch them and they dock with the Mars mission vehicle in Earth's orbit. They'll make sure the whole lot is just right before we head to Mars. Flexibility is important, so we can adjust our plans if needed. April 2033. Everyone's ready for the adventure. We perform a powerful burn, like a big push that sends us on our way to Mars. The crew will travel for about 200 days. November 2033. Finally, the crew reaches the red planet. Once they're in Mars orbit, they'll spend about 30 days exploring and doing awesome space stuff. Mars will be our playground. When it's time to return home, they'll say goodbye to the stage that helped them get into Mars orbit. Then their vehicle will meet up with the 2 stages we sent ahead. Remember these space buddies? And after that, it will take us about 340 days for the crew to come back to Earth. This is where we'll use the gravity of Venus to slingshot around the Sun. To keep the equipment and crew at the right temperature, we'll have a sunshade that will protect us from the Sun's heat since we'll be really close to it. In the end, Orion will re-enter Earth's atmosphere and splash down in the water. What a heroic ending! And this would be just the beginning. Our awesome team has another plan for the bravest adventurers out there. It's called the Conjunction-class long-stay mission. It launches in April 2033 and lasts a long time – 950 days. That's more than 2.5 years, with 550 days spent in Mars orbit. It requires fewer launches from Earth, but has some different challenges, like spending more time in microgravity and dealing with increased radiation. So we'll need some real space heroes for this one. But of course, there are some major hurdles to overcome before we can make all this happen. Experts closely looked at NASA's Journey to Mars program and found that the plan needs some serious changes. There are a few high-risk areas, like life support systems for long missions, using solar power for propulsion, making oxygen on Mars, and so on. They're also worried about timelines, funding, and many other things. So, according to them, sticking to a deadline of 2033 might be impossible with the current plans and budgets. Even aiming for 2035 carries significant risks and possible delays. But hey, space exploration has never been easy, right? With realistic determination, anything is possible. Most likely, the idea of sending people to Mars will be realized before 2040. NASA is working on finishing the plan and details to make this possible. So, even though we still have some tough nuts to crack before we can make it a reality, the dream of sending humans to Mars is exciting. It's a thrilling adventure full of challenges, discoveries, and the spirit of human exploration. So, let's show the universe what we're made of. And that would be mostly carbon. Recently, scientists have made an astounding discovery that can change the entire course of Mars exploration. Apparently, there are oceans of liquid water on the red planet, so the future looks bright. We could use this water to support future missions, and then even relocate to Mars since we wouldn't need to worry about where to get this precious liquid, right? Well, there's one big problem. These oceans of liquid water are in Mars, so deep inside that we aren't likely to get there. At least that's what a new analysis of seismic data collected by the Mars Insight lander claims. Huge reserves of liquid water seem to be the best explanation for some seismic quirks of the red planet. So all this precious water is out of our reach. But we need to find it to solve the puzzle of the aquatic history of our blushing, dusty neighbor. And the first thing we need to do is identify where the water is and how much of it the planet is hiding.
Navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration.
Now, our rovers are scurrying about on the surface of the red planet, gathering all the available data on the planet's surface geology. And it's getting increasingly obvious that Mars was once covered with water. Many factors, from Martian terrains to ancient dry lake beds and deltas, suggest that there was a time when the planet was quite soppy. These days, there's still some water on and right below the surface of Mars, but it's in the form of ice and nowhere near what Mars had in the ancient past. To understand how much of it could have been on the red planet billions of years ago, we must know where all this water went. There are two spots where the water could have gone: into space or toward the interior of Mars. Then it could have been isolated as either liquid reservoirs or ice deposits. Currently, we don't have any way of measuring how much water once leaked away. But now, we finally can find out more about the gooey center of the red planet. All thanks to the Mars Insight lander. It isn't operating anymore, but from November 2018 to December 2022, It was listening to the hums and rumbles and monitoring the activity below its feet. The thing is, acoustic waves generated by seismic activity deep inside the planet can change according to the composition and density of the material these waves are moving through. And scientists can get a lot of information analyzing the behavior of seismic waves. In this case, they used a model similar to those used to map underground oil fields and aquifers on our home planet. Then, with the help of this model, they analyzed the data gathered by InSight on Mars. They discovered that the best explanation could be that there was a layer of fractured rocks whose cracks were filled with water deep under the surface of the red planet. That layer could be at a depth of 7 to 12 miles. That's why it would be extremely tricky for future missions to get to it. And still, the new discovery could help us understand the Martian water cycle. Confirming the existence of a large reservoir of liquid water can help us sneak a peek at what the climate on Mars used to be or what it could be like one day. And if once Mars had a lot of water, it could have been habitable in the ancient past and might become habitable in the future. Water is crucial for life as we know it, so underground water reservoirs on the red planet could already be habitable. Maybe, while we're talking, tiny microorganisms or even some tentacled creatures are living their lives in the comfort of their underground home. On Earth, super deep mines do host life, and the bottom of the ocean, with its immense unbelievable pressures, isn't lifeless either. So far, we haven't found any evidence of life on Mars, but for now, it sounds like this place has the potential to sustain life. InSight data has shown that there isn't likely to be a lot of water ice in the upper crust of the planet, at least in the region around the lander. But if it turns out that there is a water-rich layer deep below the surface and stretching around the entire globe of the planet, then there would be enough water to fill ancient ocean beds and even more. Now, Mars isn't the only place outside Earth where there is water or where we might one day find water. Take the good old Moon, for example. On Earth's natural satellite, water can be found all over the surface, but it's not the water you might be imagining. On the Moon, water remains mostly as ice, and it's distributed unevenly. For example, the poles of the Moon are the regions that never receive sunlight. This is the reason they're extremely cold, and it's no wonder there's a lot of ice there. The ice in these areas is often mixed with the lunar soil and hiding deep below the surface. Then there's Enceladus, the sixth largest moon of Saturn. In reality, it's not that large, just 314 miles across. In other words, this moon is small enough to fit inside Arizona. Ooh, we should try that. Well, interestingly, when the Cassini space probe first arrived at Saturn, researchers were expecting Enceladus to be a frozen ball of ice. But what they saw was plumes of icy particles and water vapor erupting from geysers on the moon's surface. It was clear that there was a massive ocean between the moon's rocky core and its icy shell. Then there's Jupiter's moon Europa. Scientists think that this world is one of the most promising places in the solar system when it comes to searching for new life forms. That's because Europa has a huge saltwater ocean as deep as 40 to 100 miles. And even though it's under a layer of ice that is likely to be 10 to 20 miles thick, it's still potentially habitable. Astronomers believe that plumes of water might erupt from cracks in the ice shell and release the contents of the moon's ocean into space. The temperature, pressure, and chemistry are very different on Europa, and astronomers aren't sure yet how the ice behaves there. That's the main reason they haven't figured out yet how deep or large the water reservoirs on Europa are and how long they need to refreeze. But out of all the places where we could find water in the universe, the most bizarre is probably open space. In 2011, two teams of astronomers discovered a cloud of water floating freely among stars. It was the largest and farthest reservoir of water ever detected. So this massive cloud of water vapor surrounds a black hole. But not just any black hole. This one's a quasar, located 12 billion light-years from Earth. The conditions around this quasar must be really special to create such an enormous amount of water. This cloud contains 140 trillion times the volume of all the water on Earth. That's enough to give every person on the planet a whole planet's worth of water 20,000 times over. Sounds wild, doesn't it? But there's something even cooler. Astronomers think this water cloud formed just 1.6 billion years after the universe began. This discovery is yet another sign that water has been around all over the universe, even in its early days. But here's the kicker. Until they found this, scientists had never detected water vapor so far back in time. Sure, there's water in our Milky Way galaxy, but most of it's frozen solid in ice. This discovery really pushes the boundaries of what we know about water in the universe.
Of all the creatures on our home planet, this could be the only animal that could survive harsh conditions on Mars. The tardigrade. These fellas have another name because of their unusual looks: water bears or moss piglets. They live literally everywhere across the globe, from coastal dunes to mountains, from the lush Amazon rainforests to the barren landscapes of Antarctica. Some live on land, but tardigrades are creatures that need water around their bodies to enable gas exchange and generally stay hydrated. That's why they prefer soil, moss, or leaves covered with a layer of water. And since they're aquatic creatures, they usually choose freshwater bodies like lakes, rivers, and ponds. You haven't come across these cool animals before because they're only 0.02 inches long. You can barely perceive them with the unaided eye. But since they're virtually immortal, we can assume they've developed some amazing survival tactics. If we loaded them in a tiny spaceship and sent them to Mars, they'd be a little shocked at first, especially because of the temperature. Sure, they can live through a wide range, even going below minus 458 degrees Fahrenheit and up to 302 degrees Fahrenheit. And Mars might seem like a very hot planet when you see it in pictures, but the temperatures there are actually low, way lower than on Earth. I mean, it's farther from the sun and has a thin atmosphere, so temperatures there can drop to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit or go up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. On Earth, the lowest temperature was recorded in Antarctica. It was minus 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, while the highest occurred in California, 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Tardigrades are also pretty resilient when it comes to strong pressure. They can take one that's 6 times bigger than the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Now, for every 33 feet you go down below the surface, the pressure doubles. So, at a depth of 2.4 miles, the pressure is 380 times greater than at the surface. And in the very deepest parts of the ocean, it can be 1,100 times greater. The pressure on the red planet is about 6 times stronger than in the ocean depths. So I guess it's a little bit too much. It would be hard for these little creatures to adjust to such conditions. They would have to evolve through the next few generations to become even more resilient so that they could enjoy their time on Mars more. The food could be one of their main problems though. Some tardigrades mostly eat plants like moss, algae, or some flowering ones, and they like them served with a portion of bacteria. Others are carnivores that eat smaller tardigrades or other microscopic organisms. Well, they'd find nothing like this on Mars. So I guess we'd have to fill their tiny spaceships with lots of stashes of food they would be able to pull inside their tubular mouths. Now we're getting to the really tricky part: water. The red planet is a dry and dusty desert today. But come on, look at all those riverbanks and dried up deltas. Water must have flowed on its surface a long time ago. It's hard to understand where it all went, but it's highly possible most of the ancient water ended up trapped within minerals on the planet's crust. Some older research suggested that most of this water had escaped into space when the sun's radiation had ruined the atmosphere of Mars. But a new study has shown that only a little bit of water escaped, while most of it is still there, hidden and waiting for us to discover it. Also, a few years ago, researchers found signs of hydrated minerals on the slopes of the red planet, where they saw mysterious darkish streaks that seemed to flow. It mostly happens during warm seasons, since they fade when it gets cooler. These downhill flows could be evidence of real liquid water on Mars. Scientists have discovered some minerals that confirm this idea too. These minerals can lower the freezing point of water like salt does on icy roads. That's why scientists think there might be a shallow underground flow of briny water that causes these streaks. Tardigrades probably have excellent instincts, considering they can survive even in the toughest conditions, so they'd probably find water on Mars way before us. But even if they didn't do it right away, they would still have their tactics to stay alive for a while. If this creature loses 99% of its water content, it can survive by pausing most of its vital functions. It can remain in such a state for a couple of years. Tardigrades can absorb extremely strong impacts that would easily crush other animals, including us. They can withstand radiation levels so high that they could destroy a human. And even if we do send tardigrades to Mars one day, that won't be their first trip to space. In 2019, a spacecraft went to the moon, carrying thousands of tardigrades, the first lunar library, human DNA samples, and a DVD-sized archive that contained 30 million pages of information. The idea was to create archives of all the knowledge the human race had collected. But seconds before the spacecraft had to land, the mission control lost contact with it, and it crashed into the surface of the moon. The team was wondering what was going to happen with the spacecraft's cargo. After lots of discussion and analysis, they assumed that the library had survived, and even crazier, perhaps tardigrades had too. They were in this dehydrated kind of dormant state, so they shriveled up into tiny balls. They lowered their metabolism and expelled most of the water from their bodies, waiting for a better environment where they could be their best selves once again. These creatures can stay like this for decades and survive extremely harsh conditions. And this wasn't the first organized tour to space for tardigrades. In 2007, a team of scientists sent a group of these tiny water bears to orbit our home planet on the outside of a rocket for 10 days. They did pretty well, considering that when the rocket got back to Earth, 68% of these creatures were alive. Scientists don't put all their hopes only on these water bears. They keep testing if there are some other life forms that could survive on the red planet. They did an experiment called biomechs on the International Space Station. They took tiny organisms such as algae, bacteria, and other similar creatures and kept exposing them to really tough conditions in space for 18 months. This means things like huge changes in temperature, extreme radiation, and vacuum. The amazing part is that many of these tiny life forms survived these harsh conditions and came back to Earth as true space heroes. So they could probably deal with the hardships of living on Mars. Scientists studied archaea as well. Those are tiny, ancient microorganisms that have existed in salty seawater on our planet for more than 3.5 billion years. Some of their relatives from the Arctic also survived in space-like conditions. But life on Mars doesn't have to be a whole new thing. Billions of years ago, the red planet might have been a bit like Earth. It most likely had water, and that's one of the key ingredients for life. Scientists believe tiny organisms called methanogens might have thrived there. They were hiding beneath the surface to stay safe from harsh radiation. These organisms could have breathed in hydrogen and carbon dioxide, exhaling methane gas. But as they gobbled up hydrogen, which was a powerful greenhouse gas back then, they might have cooled the planet too much. So it's possible these ancient microbes are still somewhere there, trapped in ice deep below the surface. They could be in a sort of deep sleep, waiting for better conditions to wake up, or some new cool friends from Earth.
We've been dreaming about life on Mars for a long time. Not only about growing potatoes there in the future, but also about all the potatoes that could have been there in the past. Has there ever been life on Mars? Recently, scientists have found something that could be evidence of that. Let's find out what happened. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. A human hasn't set foot on Mars yet, but robots have set their wheels. The first spacecraft that visited the red planet were NASA Viking landers. They flew there back in 1976 and sent us a lot of interesting data. Back then, we didn't know anything about Mars. To us, it looked like a cold, lifeless desert. But since we're so similar, scientists began to wonder, has it always been like this? Or Is it possible that once Mars used to be thriving and full of life? And in 2022, NASA's Mars rover Perseverance found something that could shed a light on this mystery. But first of all, what is Perseverance? Scientists have suggested that if there was life on Mars once, it's unlikely that it could simply disappear without a trace. It must have left some traces, perhaps underground, where they would be protected from radioactive solar tantrums and other nastiness. So we need to check the rocks. It's important to note that we aren't looking for life on Mars right now. There most likely isn't any. Instead, we want to look into the distant past of our twin planet. We're talking billions of years ago, when Mars could have been warm, green, and far from lifeless. In other words, we have to find dead microbes and various chemical compounds similar to ones on the Earth. This is the mission of our main character, Perseverance. It arrived on Mars in February of 2021. The spacecraft landed on the bottom of the 30-mile-wide Jezero crater, and after landing, it scooted over to the west, to the place that prompted scientists to choose Jezero for research. This place is a dried-up river delta, and this former river is already more than 3.5 billion years old. The Jezero crater itself was once a large lake. Yup, apparently there was life on Mars, and scientists have suggested that these places would be perfect as bodyguards of microbes. That's exactly what bacteria do on Earth. They hide, being still in the depths of lakes and ponds, so we could probably find traces there. The researchers believe that this particular lake has the highest scientific value in the entire mission. The highest chance to find rocks on which such bacteria could survive is here in Jezero. So Perseverance went to the delta. The row wasn't easy though. The rover missed a little and landed further than planned. As one famous movie said, "This little maneuver's going to cost us 51 years." Fortunately, Perseverance took only 1 year, and on the way, it was able to explore Jezero a little. The rover uses a complex built-in tool to explore the world. The tool is called Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman and Luminescence for Organics and Chemicals, or just SHERLOC. Boy, NASA sure loves its acronyms. As the device approached the delta, the signal of organic molecules became stronger. Soon, these signals were everywhere, and besides, they were the brightest that the scientists have ever seen. What does it mean? Elementary, my dear Watson. You know, Sherlock. It's time to dig. Since July 2021, Perseverance has drilled and collected 4 thin cores of sedimentary rock. The total number of collected rocks at the moment is 12. This is the first time in history that we're collecting something like this on another planet. These 4 cores were found on 2 rocks called Skinner Ridge and Wildcat Ridge. The first pair of cores, the ones from the Skinner Ridge, don't seem very interesting at first glance. They're quite close to what we can find in many places on Earth. However, if we look at them closer, we'll see that they're dotted with round grains of some dark material. These dark grains could have once been deposited on them by an ancient river, the same one that flowed into Jezero. It's possible that the river brought them from places hundreds of miles away from Jezero, and that's pretty cool. If we study these cores, we'll be able to learn even more about the far corners of Mars. Well, there are no corners on it, but you get the idea. Then, in April 2022, Perseverance did arrive at the delta, and then scientists finally found what they were looking for. The discovery, to put it mildly, excited them. They found 2 more cores, which held organic substances. This pair was taken from the Wildcat Ridge. It's found very close to the Skinner Ridge, but the 2 rocks are quite different from each other. These samples are lighter in color and more uniform. Most likely, they're mudstone, an unusual rock similar to clay, but harder and unable to absorb water. They're also finer grain than the cores of the Skinner Ridge. Why does it matter? Because the finer the grains in the stone, the more likely it is that there may be some traces of a past life in it. On Earth, fine-grained stones most often lie on the bottoms of ponds and in similar places. There, they can preserve the remains of dead organisms and similar stuff for years. And this is exactly what we found on them. Additionally, according to scientists, there was more organic matter in these two cores than in any other place studied by Perseverance so far. It probably accumulated there while the lake was gradually evaporating billions of years ago. So, there really was life on Mars? Well, let's slow down a little. Organic substances are molecules holding carbon. And yes, on Earth, they're most often associated with life, but not always. Sometimes they can form as a result of other things. Therefore, we cannot say for sure whether there was life on Mars. We don't know if these molecules really remain from some Martian microbes, or if they're the result of some other things. But the discovery is still very significant. We have to literally keep digging this way. To learn more about this organic matter, scientists need to collect a couple more samples of fine-grained rock. It would also be great to study the material lying around these former reservoirs. Perseverance has already moved to another area, to a place with a beautiful name, Enchanted Lake. Now it needs to look for similar things there. It will also continue to study Lake Jezero. Eventually, Perseverance will climb to the top of the delta and then continue exploring ancient sites outside the crater. Sometime before the end of 2022, Perseverance will probably have 6 or more samples of the Martian cores. Unfortunately, its tools, though complex, are quite limited. This data alone won't be enough for us to get a complete picture. Therefore, NASA plans to send other spacecraft to Jezero in the coming years. Together with the European Space Agency, they're working on the next robotic mission, known as the Mars Sample Return. The name speaks for itself. These devices will arrive and take away all the test tubes from the old Prospector Perseverance. After that, these samples will be delivered to Earth, though not by Amazon Prime, and then scientists will be able to analyze them in advanced laboratories. However, all this will take a really long time. The launch of this mission is scheduled for 2027-2028, and the spacecrafts won't be able to return until 2033. But if everything goes well, it will be the first samples in history delivered to Earth from Mars. In other words, there's still enough space for research, literally. And yes, we don't yet know the true meaning of these finds. But that's why the entire mission was created, right? And who knows? Maybe in a few years we'll finally find out the truth about what happened on Mars billions of years ago. Ooh, check out the Martian! Made you look. Look.
It seems to feel at home on any planet, we need the 4 crucial elements: air, water, earth, and fire. I'm gonna tell you what you need to squeeze to get a glass of water on Mars, how to grow your salad there, charge your phone without getting an astronomical electricity bill, and even generate some fresh air. What if I tell you there's an ocean on Mars? Right, you won't believe me, but there used to be an ocean. Scientists believe that nearly 1/3 of the planet was covered with an ocean called Oceanus Borealis. Once upon a time, about 3.8 to 4.1 billion years ago, the climate on Mars was warmer and the atmosphere was denser. But over time, the climatic conditions changed dramatically, and this once endless ocean simply evaporated into the atmosphere. According to estimates, only about 1% of all water evaporated, while 99% is still locked on the red planet. So, there are 2 sources of water now: the ice polar caps and the rocks. Ice polar caps are pretty simple to understand, as we have the very same thing on Earth, but rocks containing water. I mean, my juicer won't handle stones inside it, but let's delve into these stones just a little bit. For starters, there are at least 4 types of hydrous minerals on Mars. There are hydrous clays made of silicon oxygen, and the cool thing about them is that they can even contain magnesium and iron, which will come in handy once we start dwelling on Mars. Next is hydrous sulfates, which are sulfur-based. Don't ew, I know you thought of the rotten egg smell, but it's typical of hydrogen sulfide and not just sulfur. These minerals have water incorporated right into their chemical formulas. Next comes hydrous silica, which also has water locked in its formula. Carbonate salts found on Mars may not contain actual H2O, but they can only form if there's water nearby, so they just prove there used to be an ocean. But if the scientists don't come up with an idea on how to extract water from those rocks, there's a backup plan. In 2020, researchers discovered liquid water sources which may be a part of a huge network of underground saltwater lakes. So I guess we'll find a way to stay hydrated on Mars. We can either look for those water sources better, or just invent some technologically advanced juicer to squeeze water out of those stones. The red planet may seem to us as a lifeless desert where nothing can grow. But today it's a misconception, as there's been a couple of recent updates concerning the agricultural potential of Mars. In 2022, a group of scientists made something unbelievable. They managed to grow an Earth plant on Mars. Disclaimer: it's not that they plowed Mars, watered it, added fertilizers, and patiently waited for the first sprouts to show up. They experimented on Earth, but the conditions they created were purely Martian. You see, a plant needs soil, water, food, and sunlight to grow. Food and sunlight can be created artificially, so the scientists focused on the soil and water in their experiments. There's not much Mars can offer in terms of soil, but it's rich in basalt. Plants don't fancy residing in basalt, as it doesn't have many nutrients, but still, some of them aren't that picky when it comes to soil. As we already know, water on Mars is problematic too, but it can be found in limited amounts. Still, it can't be used for agricultural needs due to its chemical composition. Long story short, it's just way too salty for any plant out there to like it. But to keep the experiment true to life, the scientists started to look for possible ways of desalinating water. Thus, they added the bacteria known as Synechococcus, and even though the saline levels decreased dramatically, it was still not enough to satisfy the finicky plants. Luckily, the scientists had Plan B, and it worked out. They took the bacteria desalinated water and filtered it through basalt. In the end, they noticed that the resulting water was suitable for the plants. But that's just a theory. Let's see what we can actually grow on Mars. The scientists experimented with turnips, lettuce, radishes, and alfalfa. At first, turnips, lettuce, and radishes refused to flourish in basalt and feed on that filtered water. But then alfalfa came into play, and it left the scientists stunned. The plant did really well in Martian conditions. This might seem to be the logical end of the experiment, and after all, alfalfa is pretty cool. It's rich in vitamin K, it has vitamin C, some vitamins B, zinc, and phosphorus. And you can Google a bunch of nice salads with alfalfa sprouts. But it has yet another property that may be a total game changer. Because of its deep roots, alfalfa can help fix soil nitrogen fertility. So once the scientists harvested the first Martian alfalfa, they immediately planted turnips, lettuce, and radishes back. This time, the crops did way better, and the scientists even noticed something they didn't expect. Turnip yields increased by 311%. I guess alfalfa has all the chances to become the star of Mars terraforming. Whoops, here comes the bad news. Even though you can theoretically stay hydrated on Mars and enjoy a fresh salad, at the moment, there's almost no way you can enjoy some fresh air on the red planet. Hey, you've noticed I said almost? Even though Mars's atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, we already know how to make small amounts of oxygen there. Meet the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, but you can call it MOXIE. It's a little helper that works together with Mars rovers. This little guy can isolate oxygen on Mars, and it already managed to produce 5 grams of it. It may sound like nothing, but 5 grams of oxygen equals 10 minutes of breathing. For now, MOXIE is for scientific use only, but it can actually help facilitate missions on Mars. Thing is, it's easier to produce oxygen directly on the spot than transport it from Earth to Mars. At the moment, MOXIE is not powerful enough. But once the scientists invent its descender, the air situation on Mars will change. For the fire to burn, we need one essential thing, which is oxygen. And we don't want to waste the results of Moxie's hard work, especially if there can be alternatives. Historically, people would use fire to cook, get warm, and probably scare away some uninvited guests like saber-toothed tigers. Today, we can use electricity to cook and get warm, and no saber-toothed tiger has ever been spotted roaming the red planet. So let's see how people can generate electricity on Mars. There are quite a few options. Solar, geothermal, and wind energy can be used on Mars almost the same way we use them on Earth. Solar energy is promising, but it still won't be as effective as on Earth. Sunlight on Mars is only 43% as strong as it is in Earth's orbit, so producing electricity this way will take more effort. Don't forget about dust storms that aren't rare on Mars. During them, the sunlight gets sorta blocked. So should we ever rely on solar energy on Mars, we must be ready for occasional electrical outages. The next problem is seasonal variations. So we could benefit from solar power for only some months of the Martian year. And, of course, no solar energy at night. Anyways, this option might work out, but it should be combined with some alternative. For instance, wind power. Wind turbines won't have any problems working during the dust storm. And they also work at night. Seems like these two sources are a perfect combo. But geothermal energy could be a cool backup plan though. It can even work on Mars better than on Earth for a few reasons. First, the atmospheric pressure is lower on Mars, so more volumes of steam can be generated to drive the turbine. Second, Mars's surface temperature is lower, and it can help too as it will increase the efficiency due to thermodynamic laws. Third, no water needed. We could use liquid carbon dioxide instead, and it would work perfectly. And unlike water, liquid carbon dioxide is free.
NASA made this cool rover called Curiosity and sent it to Mars to see what else we can find out about the red planet, the one that will possibly become our next home. Curiosity has been exploring the surface of Mars, taking measurements and gathering data about the planet for more than 10 years. And good old Curiosity stumbled upon some interesting wave-rippled rocks in the region of the Martian surface that was kind of expected to be drier. Scientists believe this area was actually a lake bed. It might be the bottom of a dried-up lake and all that sediment and other things that have accumulated there. All this can give us some important clues about the history of the lake. For instance, the types of organisms that might have lived there, how deep the lake was, how long it was there, and similar stuff. These wave-rippled patterns tell us that these rocks may have formed when strong Martian winds were moving the water in this big ancient lake. You know that specific sound you can hear when you're holding a seashell to your ear? You actually hear it because of the way the air gets trapped inside the shell and moves against its walls. The air cannot escape, so it vibrates at frequencies that depend on the size of the shell. In other words, you have a feeling you hear the sound of waves hitting a shore. That's Mars in my imagination now, a spot where you can still hear the long-lost sound of waves crashing against the shores of mysterious gigantic lakes. During its mission, Curiosity also came across a metallic object which turned out to be a meteorite. This unusual rock that came from space is made of nickel and iron. Its name is Cacao, and it's about the size of a small car, 6.5 feet long, and weighs over a ton. This is an important discovery because we don't often find metallic objects on the Martian surface. Most of the rocks there are made of basalt or some other volcanic materials, so that chunk of metal could tell us more about the history of Mars and how it formed. Plus, it definitely stands out. The surface of Mars is red from oxides, while Cacao is metallic-looking and dark gray. It's rounded and smooth, too, which means it once passed through Mars's atmosphere. There have been other robots exploring Mars, too. For instance, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, stumbled upon circular sand dunes. Sand dunes are usually very common on the red planet. They come in many different shapes and sizes, but circular ones like these are really rare. They consist of dark sand with light-colored material surrounding them. And the cool thing is that these dunes are arranged in a specific pattern, similar to the spokes of a wheel. It could be because of the way the winds blow. But back to our buddy, Curiosity. It's been exploring many other interesting things, like oxygen levels in the Martian atmosphere. The levels change depending on the season. There's more oxygen in the spring and summer. It's still not clear why, though, and of course, even that is not enough for us to really breathe there. The concentration of oxygen on Mars is 0.1%, which is about 100 times less than the concentration in Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere of Mars is mostly made up of carbon dioxide, with traces of other gases. Curiosity was so good that it also decided to analyze the age of rocks it found. It seems they're much older than we previously thought. Some of them date back more than 3 billion years. Curiosity found organic molecules in soil samples too. These molecules are basically building blocks of life. Now, this doesn't prove there's indeed life on Mars. It's just one of the things that suggests there might have been some form of life a long time ago. Curiosity discovered potential evidence that there might be a large reservoir of liquid water beneath the south polar ice cap, probably very salty and full of different minerals. This high salinity is the reason why this water could remain liquid at temperatures well below freezing. It would be cool to have some sort of subsurface ocean to take a dip in, especially when these crazy Martian winds are raging on the surface. And it would be great to have something that would protect us from those insane radiation levels on the red planet. There are some pretty toxic chemicals and salts in the Martian soil, which can be really bad for humans. Astronauts could potentially end up being exposed to these toxic chemicals, either through direct contact with the soil or by inhaling dust that contains these salts. Also, these substances could be a problem for growing crops. This is a really big discovery for long-term missions to Mars, because astronauts would need to be able to grow their own food so they can survive while there. Another thing that favors the idea of potential life on Mars is discovering methane there. Methane is a very important finding because usually living organisms produce this gas. So, where did it come from if not from them? In reality, there are a few possible explanations for that. One is the geological activity of underground reservoirs. Another idea is that meteorites brought methane to the red planet. What's interesting is that levels of methane are higher in particular areas. So, yeah, I don't know about you, but I'll stick to the theory that it comes from living organisms. Now, it's possible that volcanoes on Mars are still active. We know there are many extinct volcanoes on the red planet, but we've never found enough evidence to prove that some of them are still alive. Scientists studied volcanic deposits and found out that some volcanoes could have erupted maybe 50,000 years ago. Before that, everyone thought the last eruption happened 3 to 4 billion years ago. If you could compress the geological history of Mars into just one day, this would be like having an eruption a second ago. So, you never know. There might still be magma bubbling in secret under the Martian surface. All the future generations that might end up building their life there could really have some fun. Mars turned into a cold and barren place that can't really support life over time. And one of the main reasons for that was losing its atmosphere. The red planet used to have a much thicker atmosphere, similar to Earth's. One major reason for that is its relatively weak magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field helps protect our atmosphere from the solar wind, a stream of charged particles that comes from the sun. Without this protection, Mars had nothing to help it confront this insanely strong force that eventually took away most of its atmosphere. Another factor that played a big role in the loss of Mars's atmosphere is its relatively low gravity. Because Mars has weaker gravity than Earth, it's easier for gas molecules to escape into space. So Mars probably used to be more similar to our home planet. But with its current thin atmosphere, it can't keep any heat, which makes it very cold and very complicated for us to explore. But maybe it's better for us that we didn't visit the Red Planet back in its old times. There's this story about an ancient mega-flood that might have happened there. So yes, the Red Planet probably used to be a wetter and more hospitable place than it is today, with beautiful flowing rivers and amazing lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water. And some research showed evidence of large channels carved into the planet's surface. These channels are way bigger than any we previously found on the planet. They suggest this mega-flood happened billions of years ago. Perhaps it happened as a result of different factors, like volcanic activity, melting ice, and the release of carbon dioxide from the planet's crust. The flood may have created some temporary pools of water, too. Hopefully, it will mean more interesting clues for finding traces of microbial life. How about that?
So imagine being one of the first people sent to explore Mars. As you're approaching the red planet, something strange and creepy draws your attention. There, yes, right there. Doesn't it look like a mammoth bear's head? What or who could possibly create a bear's snout in the middle of a crater? Unfortunately, or should I say luckily, there's nothing mysterious about the bear's head. It's just a facial pareidolia. That's a tendency to see facial features in everyday things. But speaking about the finding on Mars, should we rename the phenomenon into Pareidolia? You could see that coming, couldn't you? Alright, check it out. You see a V-shaped hill that looks like a nose. Then there are two craters that look like eyes. And then there's a circular fracture pattern, the head, that surrounds the nose and the eyes. Experts think that the face could be created when a deposit was settling over a buried impact crater, and the nose might be a mud or volcanic vent with solidified lava or mud flows around it. Anyway, the crater does look like a bear's face, I'll give you that. But thanks to HiRISE, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-resolution imaging science experiment camera, another of NASA's amazing acronyms, we've seen many other crazy craters on the red planet, like smiley faces, a bird, or an elephant. First, let's have a look at the famous face of Mars. These images were first taken by the Viking orbiter in 1976. At that time, the resolution was obviously quite poor, plus the lighting was slanted, which produced the result that shocked people in the 1970s, a face carved of rock staring back at Earth. Did it mean there was another civilization on Mars that had created this monument? Nah. Look at the photo of the same spot taken by the current Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The resolution is much, much better, and the face has miraculously turned into an ordinary hill. Or look at this teeny Bigfoot, whose image was captured in 2008. I say teeny because this creature is just a few inches tall, and when the photo was taken, Bigfoot was only several yards away from the camera. And here, one curious soul zoomed in on a small rock and spotted something that resembled a gorilla. That's how some people started to believe there were apes on Mars. Yeah, really. Let me show you some more examples of imaginary creatures and faces on the red planet. Most of them come from a series of images taken by the Themis camera. Currently, it's on board the Mars Odyssey spacecraft, which only needs 2 hours to orbit the red planet, carrying some important scientific instruments. Let me introduce my Happy Martian to you. This 2-mile-wide crater was photographed in 2008. The next crater chain looks like a wasp with its wispy wings of impact debris. The whole feature was probably created by a meteorite that fell at a very low angle and broke into pieces right before the impact. Now, do you see a woolly mammoth or an elephant here? Lava flows in one region on Mars left this image on its reddish soil. The region itself, called Elysium Planitia, is famous for the planet's youngest lava flows. For example, the one that looks like a mammoth most likely formed in the past 100 million years. Just yesterday. Now let's talk about love, or rather its symbol, the heart. Do you like these two hearts on the surface of the red planet? This one is actually a mesa top outlined by frost, and this heart shape is an impact crater. The hit tore away dark surface material and exposed lighter soil underneath. Then some of the material probably flew downslope, creating the heart.
And this dust-covered hummingbird, can you see its long beak and head? Scientists aren't sure how this shape was formed, but they think erosion and wind played a part in its creation. These dark sand dune deposits look like a howling wolf. And here, can you see a series of interlocking gears? This image looks like the letter T, right? The right angle fracture was created by the tectonic stretching of the Martian crust. Do you think we might find other letters of the alphabet on Mars too? Why not? And now, how about another bizarre thing astronomers noticed on the surface of Mars? Is that a door to someone's house? It was NASA's Curiosity rover that sent this image to Earth. It became viral because this formation over here, see, looks like a door. Unfortunately, scientists, due to their rational minds, were quick to disappoint us. They claimed that it was just a natural part of the Martian landscape. There were several clues that made them think it wasn't a real door. For example, the opening is tiny, a mere 3 feet high. They're sure that what looks like a door is actually an opening in a rock created by natural forces, like winds and erosion. If you look at the rock closely, you may notice strata. Those are layers of silt that stand out because they're harder than the surrounding material. These strata dip here on the left and a bit higher on the right. They likely appeared around 4 billion years ago in a river or a wind-blown dune. Since the strata became visible, powerful Martian winds have eroded them even more. And look at this. See those cracks? That's how rocks weather on the red planet. This small cave probably formed when several fractures crossed the strata. A pretty large boulder might have fallen out under its own weight, and this created the door-shaped opening. This theory is quite plausible, because even though the gravity on Mars isn't as strong as on Earth, it's still strong enough to do it. Besides, see that rock to the right of the opening? It has a suspiciously smooth vertical edge. It must be the culprit. It probably fell out not so long ago. But it's not only the red planet that can boast of having unusual formations. Let's take this comet, for example. This image was taken by the European spacecraft Rosetta in 2014. Can you see a face on its right-hand side? Or the moon. Here's its famous rabbit. It sits upside down with its ears pointing downward. Some people see a man on the moon. It can either be his face or the entire body. If someone sees the whole human figure, it usually looks like it's carrying sticks. Sometimes it's a toad. To spot it, look at the top left-hand side of our moon. The toad is facing upward, see? Now look at this spinning neutron star. Such a star is a collapsed core of a supergiant star with a total mass of 10 to 25 solar masses. Except for black holes and some hypothetical objects, like quark stars or white holes, neutron stars are the densest and smallest known stellar objects. Anyway, back to this particular star. As you can see, this space object, located 17,000 light-years away from Earth, is surrounded by a cloud of energetic particles. And this image, taken by NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory, appeared in 2009 and became viral in no time. All because many people spotted a hand-like structure among all that space stuff. NASA explained that the star was spinning incredibly fast, spewing energy into the space surrounding it. This created intriguing and complex structures, like the large cosmic hand so many people see. Now look at the Horsehead Nebula in the constellation Orion. This is a freezing cold and dark cloud of dust and gas that was first noted in 1888. This dark shadowing is created by dust, and at the base of the nebula, there are many bright spots. Those are young stars at the stage of formation. Pay attention to this extremely bright star in the top left side of the Horsehead. Its radiation is so powerful that the star is starting to erode the cloud around itself. It means that, in millions of years, the nebula might not resemble the head of a horse anymore. Well, I won't be around then. The European Southern Observatory Very Large Telescope has captured an image in which we can see the collision of 3 different galaxies. We can even observe the effect they have on each other. But the coolest thing is that, while colliding, they created a recognizable shape. Because doesn't it look like a giant space hummingbird?
Hold on to your space helmets because NASA's Curiosity rover has just stumbled upon the wildest rock formation ever. And on April Fool's Day, isn't that just the weirdest coincidence? The device captured some images with some rocks that look like dragon bones. Now, let me take you back to 2012 when Curiosity made its grand entrance on Martian soil. It was like the queen bee of rovers, the biggest and most capable one at the time. And boy, has it been making waves since then. It's even discovered evidence of water and organic molecules on Mars. These findings were giant leaps in our quest to find out if Mars ever had its own little creatures. But hey, let's not forget that Curiosity is no spring chicken anymore. It's been trotting around Mars for a solid 11 years, and its heyday may have come and gone with the launch of the shiny new Perseverance rover. Nevertheless, Curiosity still manages to capture our imagination with its knack for spotting familiar-looking rocks. From objects shaped like fish backbones to ones that resemble traffic lights, Curiosity has given us plenty to marvel at. But now the internet is exploding with excitement over the jaw-dropping images from Curiosity's masked camera. People are going bonkers over what can only be described as dragon bones. One astrobiologist acknowledged we've seen our fair share of weird-looking objects on Mars. But this one exceeded all expectations. The current theory is that these unique ripples on the structure were formed after a whole lot of erosion, probably caused by the Martian winds. Now, you might be thinking, okay, cool, but what's the big deal about a funky rock? Well, for starters, it's a reminder of just how much we still have to uncover about our mysterious red neighbor. While we're gazing over potential dragon bones and daydreaming about interplanetary adventures, Curiosity has its serious hat on. Its main mission is to gather as much data as possible and figure out if Mars was ever a cozy home for teeny-tiny microbial life forms. It isn't the first time our trusty Curiosity rover has stumbled upon something truly out of this world. Our robotic explorer buddy has also given us a peek at a teeny-tiny rock on the red planet. It bears an uncanny resemblance to a fossilized book. Can you imagine stumbling upon a Martian library? On the 3,800th Martian day of its mission, our adventurous rover captured an intriguing snapshot of this unusual discovery. Using its nifty Mars hand lens imager attached to its robotic arm, Curiosity snapped a pic of this rock that looks like it's been plucked straight from a librarian's wildest dreams. Before you get too carried away with fantasies of outer space reading materials, let's clarify the dimensions of this rock. While it may resemble a book, it's pint-sized in comparison. In fact, it's only a mere 1 inch across. So don't go expecting the next Martian bestseller to hit the shelves anytime soon. It's more of a pocket-sized edition, perfect for a quick read during interplanetary commutes. Now, before you get too excited about this discovery, do know that NASA officials commented the peculiarly shaped rocks are pretty common on Mars. Also, billions of years of relentless Martian winds have swept away everything except these uniquely shaped remnants. Curiosity has quite the eye for spotting unusual formations. Back in February 2022, our rover pal stumbled upon a mineral flower with branching patterns that looked like it had been styled by a florist. It measured a petite 0.4 inch in width, and just a few weeks later, on February 16th, Curiosity managed to capture some rocky evidence of ancient lakes, featuring teeny ripples and waves frozen in time. If you thought Mars was just a desolate red wasteland, think again. Scientists have even discovered larger-scale shapes etched into the Martian surface by ancient water. For instance, there's a rock formation that bears an uncanny resemblance to the adorable face of a teddy bear. Who knew Mars had a cuddly side? And to top it off, there's another rock that looks like the spitting image of the frizzy-haired cartoon character. But Curiosity isn't just about oddities and peculiarities. Remember that time on February 2nd when the rover unveiled the first clear images of sun rays on Mars? Picture this. As the sun dips below the Martian horizon during sunrises or sunsets, its rays create a mesmerizing sight as they pierce through gaps in the clouds. It's like Mother Nature's own laser light show. There are even images online with a so-called doorway on Mars. And no, it's not a secret passage for little green Martians to hop in and out of, if that's what you're thinking. The internet went bonkers when Curiosity captured a snapshot that seemed to reveal an object resembling a door. Cue the weird theories and intergalactic excitement, nothing to worry about, as experts have chimed in with a down-to-earth explanation. According to specialists who know a thing or two about Mars geology, this particular structure is most likely the result of natural erosion. Boring answer, I know, but erosion is yet again to blame here. However, some scientists have also chimed in with a dash of humor on the matter. They pointed out that the door stands at a modest height of less than 3 feet. So even if we were to believe it's a doorway for Martians, We'd have to imagine a particular type of tiny extraterrestrial beings, like Martian hobbits. But let's get back to reality, shall we? The consensus among experts is that this door is nothing more than a shallow opening in the rock, cleverly crafted by the forces of nature. Those visible layers were likely deposited around 4 billion years ago under sedimentary conditions, potentially in a river or a wind-blown dune. The winds on Mars have been hard at work, eroding these layers over time, leaving behind the intriguing features we see today. And if you look closely, you'll notice a few natural vertical fractures scattered throughout the image. These fractures are a result of rocks weathering on Mars, and the small cave-like structure we've affectionately nicknamed the door seems to have formed at the intersection of these fractures and the aforementioned layers. It's almost as if a gigantic Martian boulder decided to take a tumble, creating this whimsical cave entrance. There's also a famous Mars crater that's not just your ordinary, run-of-the-mill hole in the ground. It's chock full of shiny opal gemstones. According to a cool new study, those mysterious halos of rocks surrounding cracks in the Martian crater might actually be made up of water-rich opal gemstones. Can you imagine that? Mars, the planet of bling! Curiosity yet again came to the rescue and did some serious snooping around. It seems there's an ancient dried-up lakebed on Mars that is teeming with opal gemstones. These objects could be evidence that water and rock have been having a grand old time beneath the Martian surface. Much more recently than anyone had previously thought, that is. Now, when scientists start talking about water, you know they're on the hunt for signs of life. After all, water is pretty crucial for life as we know it. But here's the catch. Water isn't flowing on Mars anymore. So these clever scientists have to put on their detective hats and search for geological signs that water once existed there. What does opal have to do with water on the Martian surface? Well, to make opal, you need rocks with a whole lot of silica and some good old H2O. There's more. Researchers also dove deep into the Curiosity rover's image archive and discovered that these opal-rich halos are not just hanging out in one spot. Nope. They seem to be spread out all over the place in Gale Crater, which is like a huge ancient lakebed. So what did these clever scientists do next? They ran some tests, of course. Using Curiosity's fancy instruments, they confirmed that these light-colored halos do, in fact, contain opal. All this data and those cool fracture halo pictures from earlier in the mission led the researchers to a mind-boggling conclusion. Water must have been hanging out all over Gale Crater for a long time after the ancient lake dried up. This means that life might have existed on Mars and for a bit longer than we'd been guessing. Who knows, maybe even into Mars's modern geological period, which, get this, started a whopping 2.9 billion years ago.
Imagine a world where the red, barren landscape of Mars is transformed into a lush and verdant garden. A world where water flows freely, carving canyons and creating lakes and oceans. Can we achieve such a world by pouring the Earth's water onto the surface of Mars? And don't rush to say no. Let's explore this possibility. Alright, let's say we could magically transport all of the water on Earth to Mars. This supersized game of water pong would be crazy in both engineering and logistics. So how do we even do that? First of all, we're talking about millions and millions of gallons of water, which is no small feat. We would need some really big tanks to get all this water off the Earth. We would also have to figure out how to launch it all into space. This would require some serious rocket technology, as well as a lot of fuel. We could probably create an entire fleet of spacecraft specifically designed for the task. Just imagine that, a fleet of giant water tankers packed with tons of carefully harvested water, blasting off from Earth's surface and hurtling through space at unimaginable speeds. Wouldn't that be a cool sight? Now, another way. Probably a better one would be to launch a large number of smaller missions over time, each carrying a smaller amount of water until enough of it has been transported to Mars. So, let's say we manage to do all that. What happens next? After we get to Mars, we'd need to distribute this water all across the planet. We could use a network of underground pipes or some special drones to transport the water to different locations. This is just some basic things, and as you can see, we already need a lot of planning and resources. Moreover, a crazy operation like this would require a massive coordinated effort from scientists, engineers, and space agencies all over the world. And let's not forget about the costs. No wonder that scientists don't really consider it a viable plan. But the scale of this operation isn't the only problem. Hypothetically, let's say that we figured all that out and poured the Earth's water on Mars. Now what? Well, believe it or not, it would be almost completely useless. Our main challenge will be the atmosphere and current climate of Mars. Mars is a dry desert with an atmosphere that's only about 1% as thick as Earth's. This means that any water poured onto the surface would quickly evaporate. It would be pretty hard to create a stable environment when the entire lake can go poosh in a matter of seconds. And if the water doesn't evaporate, then, on the contrary, it will turn into ice. Mars's surface temperature is well below freezing. Thin atmosphere only makes things worse. Another challenge is that Mars has a very weak magnetic field, which means it has little protection from the solar wind. Solar wind is a stream of charged particles that are constantly flowing out from the sun. These winds are pretty dangerous. They can strip away any water that's put on the Mars surface. Also, the solar radiation on Mars is much stronger than on Earth. This would make it even more difficult to maintain any liquid water there. And finally, don't forget that we also need to purify this water to remove all the bacteria before drinking it. But let's not give up. If we stay super optimistic, we can still try to solve these problems. Basically, we need to find a way to maintain liquid water in one place for a long time and make sure that it doesn't freeze or evaporate. So how do we do it? There are a few ways we can go about it. Number 1. Insulation. We could wrap all the water containers in insulation materials, like foam for example, or some reflective materials that can help to keep the water from freezing. Number 2. Heating. We could use various heaters and devices to keep the temperatures above freezing, even thermal blankets. Although this would require a lot of energy and would be a difficult task. Number 3. Underground reservoirs. We could dig a large hole and cover it with a transparent material to allow sunlight to pass through. This would help keep the water warm and insulated. Number 4. Salinity. Adding a small amount of salt or other dissolved minerals to water can lower its freezing point. Although we'll need much more salt for things like lakes, and this method isn't the most efficient. And finally, number 5. Building a greenhouse. We could build a greenhouse or some other structure that can trap heat and create a more Earth-like environment. This option is probably the best one. After all, a greenhouse would also help us to grow various plants or other organisms. Yay, life! Alright, great. Let's say we've discovered some way to store water on Mars and keep it there in a liquid, lukewarm state. What now? What impact would this have on Mars? Actually, this would be great. If we were to pour all this water on Mars, it could have drastically changed the climate of this cold, red desert. First of all, we could create a so-called greenhouse effect. It's when gases in a planet's atmosphere trap heat, causing the planet's temperature to rise. And yeah, this is pretty bad for Earth, but for Mars, whose temperatures jump between 70 and -200 degrees Fahrenheit, it would be awesome. This could cause the atmosphere to thicken and lead to the melting of the polar ice caps. Wouldn't that be awesome? Mars would begin to gradually turn from a lonely desert into Earth 2.0. It also means that the planet's atmosphere will change. For example, the weather patterns. Clouds could form on Mars, rains would begin to fall. And rains, as we know, transfer water from one region to another, which would mean they could water plants if they appeared on Mars. But all of this is pure speculation. We can't be completely sure what kind of impact pouring water on the Martian surface would have on the planet's climate. Perhaps, to create this greenhouse effect, we would need much more water than what we can transport. But if despite all these challenges, we had succeeded with our mission and made Mars much warmer and moist, could life have been finally born there? Unfortunately, that would still be pretty unlikely. Yes, water is very important for creating life, but that's not all we need. The composition of the Martian soil isn't very conducive to supporting life. The soil is mostly made of minerals called regolith, which are composed mainly of dust, sand, and other materials that aren't very good for plants. Theoretically, we could terraform Mars. Terraforming is a gradual, slow change of the planet so that it becomes suitable for our life, but this would be a very complex, long, and costly process. Oh, and by the way, what would happen to our Earth after all that? We took quite a lot of water, didn't we? From Earth's perspective, transporting water to Mars would require an enormous amount of resources, including energy and different materials. And the amount of water we'd have to spend would be staggering. The loss of such a large amount of water from Earth's own reserves could have a significant impact on our planet, especially in areas where water is already scarce. So basically, this is a really bad idea, no matter how you look at it. Yeah, it may sound interesting, but it's not a viable plan at all. It would require too many resources, too much money, and it wouldn't even be worth it. That's why scientists and space agencies don't consider this idea seriously. Besides, there are many other more realistic and achievable goals in the field of Mars exploration. For example, we can keep studying the planet's geology, atmosphere, and potential for past or present life. These studies would help us to find some resources that could support future human exploration. Overall, we need to answer many more questions about Mars before we even begin to consider colonizing it. So let's keep an eye on scientific news and updates.
When we think of Mars, we often imagine a barren wasteland, a place devoid of life and color. Just a big, lonely, rusty rock hurtling through space. For a long time, scientists believed that Mars was indeed a red planet. You see, Mars has a special talent. When it's far away from us, it appears as a tiny twinkling red dot in the night sky, like a glowing ember in a sea of stars. But as it gets closer to Earth, it becomes more visible, so its reddish hue becomes more apparent. This phenomenon has captured the imaginations of people throughout history, leading to countless speculations and myths about the nature of Mars. Astronomers, of course, noticed it too. They believed that the color was due to vast deserts covered in iron oxide or rust. That's why we started calling Mars the Red Planet. When the space age started, NASA and other space agencies started sending missions to Mars. Early orbiter images also showed Mars with a reddish hue. This idea was further popularized by countless movies, books, and TV shows. They all showed us this dramatic picture of Mars as a desolate, harsh world with nothing but endless deserts and towering red cliffs. However, as technology advanced, we started sending orbiters, landers, and rovers on Mars. Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity, and many others. They all are our interplanetary detectives. Orbiters as Mars' all-seeing eyes in the sky. These spacecraft orbit around Mars and capture stunning images from high above. Like a cosmic paparazzi, they try to reveal all Mars' hidden secrets. But orbiters can only reveal so much. That's where landers and rovers come in. Mars ground explorers. These robotic adventurers hang around on Martian highways and byways. They try their best to study Martian rocks, soils, and atmosphere. And thanks to them, we finally found out the truth. Turns out, Mars is a world of contrasts and a rich palette. Imagine standing on the surface of Mars. Instead of a sea of monotonous red sands, you'll be greeted by a breathtaking tapestry of colors. As you look around, you might see sand dunes that resemble a scrumptious butterscotch dessert, with their warm caramel hues stretching across the landscape. You come across valleys and plains that glisten with a golden glow, as if Mars has hidden nuggets of precious metal just beneath its surface, waiting to be discovered by intrepid space prospectors. Moving on, you stumble upon areas with a brown and tan color palette that resembles a Martian safari, with shades reminiscent of the African savanna. All that's missing is some unique Martian wildlife. And in some regions, you might even catch a glimpse of a slight greenish hue that adds a touch of mystery to the landscape. These green colors indicate the presence of minerals on the planet. All these colors reveal Mars's exciting geologic history. They're the results of various minerals and chemical compounds. There are things such as olivine, sulfates, and clays that create this visual feast for the eyes. And, by the way, our idea of Mars as a boring desert is also a myth. Actually, its landscapes are shaped by ancient river channels, volcanoes, impact craters, and shifting sands. However, there's also some unpleasant addition to all these beauties. The thing is, humans have already managed to leave their mark on Mars, even though we haven't even visited it yet. Yep, we've already turned the red planet into a celestial landfill. But to be honest, it was inevitable. Imagine rovers and landers zipping across Mars, conducting scientific experiments. Of course, they would leave behind a trail of debris. Discarded spacecraft parts, deflated airbags, and other leftovers. Now the planet isn't really barren, is it? Well, at least it will become a treasure trove for archaeologists of the future. But it also serves as a cautionary tale. We need to remember to stay responsible during our space exploration. So, now we know that the real Mars is a vibrant world of surprises. But this isn't the only cosmic body in the solar system that turned out to be cooler than we thought. Remember Pluto? That guy who was once known as the 9th planet in our solar system? And now we consider it one of the dwarf planets. So the latest research has revealed to us very interesting things about this fella. Pluto is often depicted as a tiny, frozen world covered in ice, like a cosmic popsicle. But when the New Horizons spacecraft zoomed past Pluto in 2015, it revealed the true appearance of this planet. From a distance, Pluto appears to be a mix of reddish-brown and charcoal black, like it's wearing a stylish outfit for a formal cosmic event. But as you get closer, you'd start to notice a breathtaking array of colors. Imagine standing on a frozen plain that glistens like a diamond, with patches of crimson red that look like they were painted by a Martian artist with a flair for drama. Nearby, you might spot patches of charcoal black, giving the landscape a moody and mysterious vibe. As you continue your exploration, you might come across regions that are a stunning blend of orange, yellow, and white. And if that wasn't enough, you might also encounter icy mountains that shimmer with a hint of blue, creating an otherworldly glow that would leave you awestruck. Also, it turns out Pluto isn't just a simple frozen ball, but a dynamic world with beautiful mountains. Pluto's tallest mountain is called the Tenzing Montes, and it's about 20,000 feet tall, almost as big as Everest. It's like Pluto wanted to show off and prove it's not just a runt in the planetary neighborhood. The dwarf planet's surface is also dotted with vast icy plains that are as smooth as a skating rink. It's like Pluto is inviting us to strap on our ice skates and glide across its frozen surface. But the real kicker was when New Horizons discovered that Pluto has a heart-shaped region on its surface made of icy plains called Tomball Regio. Who knew this little planetary oddball could have so much love? Or let's take Saturn's moon Titan, for example. What we used to imagine about Titan was just the tip of the iceberg. This guy has also revealed itself to be a celestial wonderland. In the past, we thought Titan might be a barren and desolate moon, perhaps covered in a monotonous layer of rock and ice. But boy, were we wrong. Titan has turned out to be one of the most intriguing and diverse bodies in our solar system. First of all, forget about the dull grays and browns. Titan's surface is actually draped in a thick haze that creates an ethereal orange glow, like a mystical mist that adds an otherworldly touch to the landscape. Titan also has lakes, rivers, and even seas. But hold your horses, we're not talking about water here. This moon is too cold for liquid water to exist in its frigid atmosphere. Instead, its lakes and seas are filled with liquid hydrocarbons, like ethane and methane, which act as the main liquid on this moon. Imagine standing on the shores of a lake, looking out at the liquid methane gently lapping against the rocky coastline, with a hazy orange sky above. It's like a surreal blend of Earth and extraterrestrial worlds, all rolled into one. And finally, Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system. It has often been depicted as a vibrant orange planet with swirling red and brown bands. However, In reality, Jupiter's atmosphere isn't orange. It's rather dominated by shades of red, orange, brown, and white. NASA's Juno mission has provided us with stunning images of this planet. In these photos, we can see cloud patterns, massive storms, and a complex system of belts on Jupiter. Turns out, it's more breathtaking and diverse than we had imagined. So there you have it, space explorers. Seems like our imaginations can be way off when it comes to the breathtaking beauty and diversity of the cosmos. So the next time you gaze up at the night sky and imagine what those distant worlds might look like, remember that reality can be even more astonishing than our wildest dreams.
What if our moon was hollow? Would we be able to hide inside in case some terrible catastrophe destroyed our home planet? Well, the supporters of the hollow moon theory believe that it's actually a real option. The hollow moon is a hypothesis claiming that Earth's moon is either completely hollow or has quite a lot of place inside. The thing is, the moon is less dense than Earth, and it seems to support the idea of its hollowness. But according to science, the reason is the fact that Earth's upper mantle and crust are less dense than the heavy iron core of our planet. Then, there's also the claim that the moon rings like a bell. For almost a decade, between 1969 and 1977, seismometers installed on the moon by the Apollo missions kept recording moonquakes. The moon was reported to be ringing like a bell during such quakes, especially shallow ones. On the 20th of November, 1969, Apollo 12 deliberately crashed the ascent stage of its lunar module into the surface of our natural satellite. According to NASA, after that, the ringing continued for almost an hour. This made some people argue that the moon must be hollow like a bell. Later, lunar seismology researched those shallow moonquakes and showed that they acted differently than quakes on our planet, mostly due to differences in type, texture, and density of the lunar and Earth's rock layers. The speed of sound waves in solids is determined by the medium's compressibility and density. No one has ever found any evidence of a large empty space inside the moon. And still, in 1970, Michael Vasson and Alexander Sherbakov suggested a hypothesis that the moon could be a spaceship designed by mysterious extraterrestrial beings. In 1965, writer Isaac Asimov made an observation that added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theories. He marveled at the sheer astronomical accident that the moon fits so snugly over the sun during total eclipses. The sun's greater distance makes up for the incomparably larger size of the star. As a result, it seems to us that the moon and the sun are the same size. The author added that there was no astronomical reason why the sun and the moon should fit so well. So since the 1970s, conspiracy theorists have been quoting Asimov's words about solar eclipses as evidence of the artificial origin of the moon. Mainstream astronomers disagree with such an interpretation, saying that the angular diameters of the moon and the sun don't perfectly match during eclipses. They vary by several percent over time. Many other pieces of evidence confirm that the moon is a solid body that formed after a planetoid crashed into Earth. In the past, scientists thought that the moon appeared after our rapidly spinning planet got rid of a good chunk of its mass. This idea was suggested in 1879 by George Darwin, the son of the very Charles Darwin, the famous biologist. This theory remained popular until the Apollo missions. Then, in 1925, Austrian geologist Otto Ampferer offered another idea, that Earth and the moon could have formed together from a primordial accretion disk, a rotating disk of dense gas and dust surrounding a young, newly formed star, and used to be a double system. The third theory stated that the moon could have once been a planetoid caught by the gravity of our planet. The modern explanation usually involves the giant impact hypothesis. According to it, a Mars-sized space body hit Earth and created a debris ring around our planet. In the end, this ring gathered into a single natural satellite, our moon. But getting back to the hollow moon theory, at the moment, there's no scientific evidence to support this hypothesis. Seismic observations and other data indicate that the moon has a solid interior with several layers, a thin crust, quite extensive mantle, and a dense core. These days, the idea of the hollow moon is considered to be a conspiracy theory.
There are a few theories about how the moon appeared in the sky, and recently a new idea has popped up. But before we discuss this newcomer, let's look at the most popular hypotheses of the moon's formation. The capture theory claims that Earth's natural satellite used to be a wandering body, something like a large asteroid. It had formed somewhere else in the solar system before it was captured by our planet's gravity when passing nearby. The accretion hypothesis suggests that the moon formed in orbit around Earth at the same time as our planet appeared in the darkness of the cosmos. Then, there's the fission theory that says that at one point in its development, Earth was spinning so fast that some of its material broke away and started to orbit the planet. And the giant impact theory, which is the most popular these days, claims that the moon formed during a collision between Earth and another hypothetical planet called Theia, which was way smaller, probably the size of Mars. The resulting debris collected in an orbit around Earth and formed the moon. And now, let's move to the new theory you've been patiently waiting for. According to it, our satellite might have formed immediately, in a matter of hours, after the collision between Earth and Theia. The material from the two planets was likely launched directly into Earth's orbit right after the impact. It formed the moon and left traces deep inside Earth. In previous scenarios, Theia's remains were thought to have been scattered all over space, mixing with just a bit of the material coming from our own planet. But then, why do we see such shocking similarities between the moon's and Earth's compositions? Could it be that Theia was isotonically and chemically similar to Earth? Unlikely. But according to the new theory, more material from Earth was used to create the moon, its outer layers in particular. It might explain this similarity in composition. One more theory also tries to explain this mysterious similarity, the synestia model. According to it, our satellite formed inside a swirl of vaporized rock left by the collision. But this theory can't explain the moon's current orbit. The new single-stage theory does offer us plausible explanations for both the similarities in composition and the orbit of the moon. It might also provide us with some answers to previously unsolved mysteries. Since this scenario puts the moon into a wider orbit and gives it an interior that is not fully molten, it can explain the satellite's tilted orbit and thin crust. In any case, to confirm one of these theories, we need to analyze future lunar samples that will be brought to Earth by NASA's upcoming Artemis missions. Scientists will be able to get their hands on some material from deeper beneath the moon's surface and compare if real data matches these simulated scenarios. In the past, the Apollo missions already brought back about 1/3 of a ton of rock and soil from our satellite. These samples showed that Earth and the moon had some remarkable chemical similarities. They could only suggest one thing. These space objects had a linked history. If the moon had formed elsewhere and been captured by our planet's gravity later on, its composition would be very different from that of Earth. But if the moon had been created at the same time as Earth, or if it had broken off our planet, the type and proportion of minerals on the moon would be the same as on Earth. But they are a bit different. The moon's minerals contain less water than their terrestrial counterparts. The satellite is also richer in materials that form rapidly at high temperatures. That's why the most accepted model of the moon's formation these days is the giant impact model. Meteorites coming from the moon are a great source of data for studying the origins of our satellite too. They can tell us even more about the moon than Apollo samples, all because such meteorites come from all over the surface of the moon. Meanwhile, Apollo samples were collected just in one place near the equator, on the near side of the moon.
Technological progress does not stand still, and over the past decade, the resolution of images of the lunar surface has improved greatly. Many pits have been discovered on the surface, and some of them are really impressive in size. The largest are hundreds of feet deep. However, technology is not yet advanced enough for us to study the bottom of such pits in detail. That's why a recent discovery is surprising. It turns out that huge pits can extend deep into the rock of the moon. It's a groundbreaking discovery. Let's figure out why. So look at this giant underground cave. Leonardo Carrere and Lorenzo Bruzone from the University of Trento were thrilled to finally confirm the existence of such structures on the moon. They analyzed images taken by the mini RF instrument on board the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2010. The original images didn't have excellent resolution, so the authors had to do a huge amount of work, using modern data analysis and modeling techniques. But first things first, why does it all matter so much? Well, instead of building homes on the surface of the moon, we might be able to live inside these natural caves. They could offer protection from dangerous things like harmful space radiation, extreme temperature swings, and even meteorites. According to planetary geologist Wes Patterson from Johns Hopkins, even though we'd still have to bring materials from Earth to make those caves habitable, using them would be a lot easier and cheaper than building bases on the surface. Based on the collected data, the cave is about 150 feet wide and up to 260 feet long, which is just a bit smaller than a football field. It's located in a deep pit called the Mare Tranquillitatis Pit, which likely formed when an ancient lava tube collapsed. Although the moon has no active volcanoes today, billions of years ago, its surface was covered with lava that flowed through valleys, carving out these tubes below the surface. Over time, some of the lava tubes became unstable and collapsed, creating pits like the one in question. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, has already found more than 200 of such pits on the moon. It means there could be hundreds of hidden caves waiting to be explored on our satellite. When publishing their findings in Nature Astronomy, the researchers suggested that the caves could offer future astronauts a safe place to live and work, protecting them from the moon's extreme conditions. And extreme they are. One of the biggest challenges of living on the moon is its temperatures. The lunar surface gets extremely hot during the day, reaching about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the temperature drops below minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit at night. But inside the caves, the temperature could stay much more consistent. A separate study done in 2022 used computer simulations to predict that some of those caves could maintain a comfortable temperature of about 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Much easier to manage, right? Unfortunately, getting to the caves won't be easy. The Mare Tranquillitatis cave is over 400 feet below the surface, at the bottom of a steep slope covered in loose debris. It would take some clever engineering to get up and down that slope. The options could be using jetpacks, a lunar elevator, or some other kind of technology. We must find a way to transport astronauts safely. There's also a lot more to discover. Radar technology could help scientists find even more caves and lava tubes on the moon. In the future, a spacecraft with higher resolution radar could even map the insides of the pits that LRO has already found. According to the researchers, this kind of complete survey could help them figure out the best locations for future lunar bases and other explorations. And there's another potential bonus. Those caves could contain water. Scientists have already found frozen water on the moon, under the surface, and in permanently shadowed craters. Tiny amounts are also scattered across the lunar dirt. Water is a critical resource for any moon base, and finding it in the caves could make the idea of living there even more realistic. All in all, this discovery could be a game changer for lunar exploration. Living in natural caves on the moon might be a more practical and safer option than building something on the surface. It could also bring us one step closer to making the moon a place where humans can live and work for the long term.
Enceladus. Saturn's ocean-covered moon spews water into space non-stop. The liquid leaves the insides of the moon through fractures in its icy crust. In the mid-2000s, the Cassini spacecraft analyzed the composition of these jets and spotted molecules that included ammonia and carbon dioxide. Both compounds are crucial for the existence of life on Earth. But recently, scientists have made another analysis of the Cassini samples. And this study has revealed a great chemical diversity of Enceladus. It makes this small icy moon one of the top candidates for finding life in the solar system. In an attempt to find out the true chemical makeup of the moon, researchers at NASA examined the data collected in 2001 and 2012 again. All this information was gathered by NASA's Cassini-Huygens mission. It flew a spacecraft through the impressive water plumes of Saturn's moon many times. The samples were analyzed by a special instrument identifying compounds by their molecular weight. This instrument is called a mass spectrometer, and Cassini had one on board. The initial analysis showed that the jets contained 5 types of molecules: water, carbon dioxide, ammonia, methane, and molecular hydrogen. But later, experts spotted a few bigger and heavier compounds, including ethane and hydrogen cyanide, as well as traces of methanol. The initial Cassini analysis didn't show these compounds because the equipment on board the spacecraft wasn't capable of identifying them. That's why it came as a surprise that Saturn's small moons could be so chemically active and able to produce heavy molecules. Together with previously found components like water and ammonia, the newly discovered molecules might serve as fuel and building blocks for microbes, which in turn means that they could probably support an independent origin of life. It's one of the reasons why, after the discovery of its oceans, Enceladus has been one of the main targets in the search for extraterrestrial life. The molecules might be mixing together through the hydrothermal activity on the moon's seafloor, creating a habitable environment where life could appear. So far, scientists haven't found any evidence that could indicate that such a process has actually been going on. Plus, no one knows yet how the erupting water makes its way through the icy shell of the moon. Still, the most recent findings might help ongoing and planned missions exploring other ocean worlds similar to Enceladus. One of such worlds is Jupiter's watery moon Europa. This place is likely to have the same properties as Saturn's moon. Hopefully, we'll get the answers to these questions soon, with the help of the European Space Agency's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer spacecraft. At the moment, it's on its way to the Jupiter system. But then another question might arise. If we found the conditions where life can originate and even thrive, can't this fact already be proof of the existence of extraterrestrial life? Doesn't it mean that life must be abundant in the universe? Then why haven't we come across other species yet? The answers to this paradox vary from optimistic to downright terrifying. It might be because we haven't been looking long enough, or maybe we haven't been emitting enough traceable signatures for other civilizations to find us. Or perhaps no species have ever made it to the point where they could come into contact with other civilizations. There's also the frightening dark forest hypothesis. It's a theory claiming that loads of alien civilizations exist throughout the universe, but they are all silent and hostile. They try to maintain their undetectability for fear of getting destroyed by another unfriendly species. So, following this hypothesis, we can presume that any spacefaring civilization must view other intelligent forms of life as an inevitable threat, and the best course of action is to hide its existence altogether. This makes the cosmic electromagnetic spectrum eerily quiet, with no evidence of any intelligent extraterrestrial life. This way, the universe can be compared to a dark forest filled with armed hunters wandering among trees like ghosts.
There's something happening inside the moon, something that nobody expected. Not a dramatic shift you'd see on the outside, but deep down, where things seem frozen in time, scientists have uncovered a hidden layer of what you could only call moon goo. Remember those school lessons about the crust, mantle, and core? Much like the Earth, the moon is made up of layers, a crust, mantle, and core. However, the moon's core is much smaller compared to ours. Earth's core is huge. It makes up about a third of our entire planet's mass. The moon's core makes up only about 1 to 2% of its mass, and its diameter is about 1/5 the diameter of the moon itself. It's surrounded by a hard, rocky mantle. But it turns out that between these two layers, that mysterious goo layer, and it's way more important than you might think. The layer is soft and partially molten, ebbing and flowing like the tides in our oceans. It rises and falls, stretching and shifting as if it were alive. Its movement isn't chaotic, but subtle and regular. We always knew that the moon influences our seas and oceans, causing tides with its gravity. But it turns out that we influence it back. The goo ocean reacts to the gravitational dance between Earth and the Sun. Also, the molten layer could be made of ilmenite, a very intriguing material. Ilmenite is rich in titanium, a strong and lightweight metal that we really love over here on Earth. Titanium is used in everything from airplane parts and spacecraft to medical devices, even in everyday items like bikes and laptops, all because it's incredibly strong and very resistant to corrosion and heat. So, if the moon might have a molten layer rich in ilmenite, that would be awesome. Astronomers are already planning for lunar bases, and if we had a material to build structures, spacecraft, or even tools for astronauts right there, that would be a game changer. Otherwise, we'd need to transport materials from Earth, which is extremely costly. This is our first tangible sign that the moon is not just a cold, boring rock. Instead, it's dynamic, living, and breathing, with moving forces beneath the surface. NASA used new special tools to discover this: the Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. These are both space missions designed to study the moon, but they don't just look at the surface like a telescope. Instead, they help measure things we can't see with our eyes, like the moon's gravity and how it changes over time. Grail sent 2 small spacecraft around the moon named Ebb and Flow. Clever. The idea was for these spacecraft to fly close to each other and measure tiny differences in the moon's gravity as they go. It's like they were feeling the moon's invisible pull in different places. If the moon's gravity was stronger in one spot, the spacecraft moved closer together, and if it was weaker, they moved farther apart. This helps scientists understand what's going on inside the moon, even if they can't actually go there. And the spacecraft intentionally crashed into the moon in December 2012 to end the mission. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is a bit different. It takes super detailed pictures of the moon and collects other important information about its surface. By combining the information from both Grail and LRO, we were able to find this goo layer. But this discovery actually challenges everything we thought we knew about lunar geology. How did this molten layer get there? How long has it existed? And perhaps more fascinating, how it stayed warm for millions of years? That's $1 million questions. The moon's core generates heat just like ours. But it's not as easy as saying, oh, the core's heat probably keeps it warm and molten. Well, first, the moon's core is much smaller and less active than Earth's, meaning it produces significantly less heat. Plus, the moon is much cooler than Earth in general. With temperature dropping to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, how could this inner layer still stay in this flowing state? That's still a mystery. In any case, this goo could actually explain a lot of stuff about the moon. For example, astronomers were exploring moonquakes and how they happen. Now they think that it might be this semi-molten layer shifting and moving beneath the surface. Now, beyond the moon itself, it also tells us more about other celestial bodies. If the moon, something we considered basically a huge static rock, has such a dramatic life, what about other planets, moons, or asteroids? Could they also hide similar hidden movements beneath their surfaces? We can even understand our own planet better, learn more about how tides and similar stuff works. There are so many great discoveries we've been making on the moon. Recently, we found some awesome stuff beneath the surface, massive caves hidden for millions of years. For over 50 years, scientists have suspected that the moon's surface is full of underground tunnels and caves. These are known as lava tubes because they were formed by lava. Duh! Millions of years ago, the moon was pretty unstable. It underwent some volcanic activity, causing eruptions. When a volcano erupts, lava can flow across the surface. As the outer layer of the lava cools and hardens, it forms a solid roof of dark material. It's actually what these famous dark spots on the moon are. These are dark, hardened remains of ancient lava. But the hot, molten lava continues to flow through the center. Once the eruption ends and the lava drains away, what's left behind is an empty hollow tunnel, hence a lava tube. On Earth, we have lava tubes in places like Hawaii or Iceland, where volcanic activity has created similar underground tunnels. The same thing happened on the moon billions of years ago, although they're much crazier compared to ours. In fact, lunar lava tubes are now thought to be some of the largest and longest in the entire solar system. One such cave was discovered beneath the famous Mare Tranquilitas, the place where Apollo 11 first landed, and it's at least 340 feet deep. Now, all these lava systems have remained hidden just beneath the surface, untouched for millions of years. only now they finally managed to prove their existence. Scientists from the University of Trento in Italy found them using special radar technology and advanced computer methods. These techniques let you see underground by sending radar waves. The waves bounce back and give clues about what's hidden underneath. By analyzing the way these waves reflected back, the researchers could detect the shape and size of the hidden caves. Now, the best thing about this discovery is that we could build all our bases there. These caves protect from radiation, harsh winds, and meteoroids. NASA even found evidence that some of these caves stay at a steady 63 degrees Fahrenheit. That's some crazy coziness for the moon. And on top of that, there could even be some water there. So humans could take shelter inside these natural tunnels and build entire colonies on the moon. And I know what you're thinking. Could unexpected lunar monsters hide deep in those caves? Well, sure. There's a huge potential for exploring these caves and finding some awesome stuff. But even if we manage to find a miracle, like small life or microbial organisms, there's a 99% chance that there won't be actual animals or monsters. It would just be impossible for them to develop in such conditions. But it would make a great horror movie. Researchers want to send robots or drones to explore the tunnels first, and then see if they're safe enough for humans. And it's not just the US getting in on the action. China is also investigating the possibility of using these moon caves as a future base, showing that the race to explore and settle the moon is heating up.
Soon we might start constructing loads of stuff on the moon. All because India's moon mission has recently detected sulfur near the moon's south pole. This chemical element can come in extremely handy for creating infrastructure on our satellite. It's the first time this chemical element has been discovered on Earth's natural satellite. This sought-after element is mostly found near Earth's volcanoes. Its appearance on the moon speaks volumes about the satellite's volcanic history and its past atmospheric conditions. The mission's rover detected this chemical element less than a week after touching down around 70 degrees from the moon's south pole on the 23rd of August, 2023. This historic landing on the lunar surface made India the fourth country to safely land a mission on the moon. It's also the first spacecraft to touch down so close to the south pole of our satellite. It's an area of strategic importance because it's believed to be home to deposits of water ice. If it turns out to be true, future missions might be able to harvest it and turn this water ice into drinking water or even rocket fuel. For 2 weeks, the lander carried out the data collection, mainly focused on the analysis of the moon's soil and its extremely thin atmosphere. Meanwhile, the solar-powered Pragyan rover started its quest to find frozen water on the moon. As for the lander, it demonstrated another amazing feat on the 3rd of September. The spacecraft fired up its engines and lifted itself for about 16 inches into the air. Then it made a tiny hop to land 12 to 16 inches away from its original position. It's kinda a big deal. Being able to get a lander back off the surface of the moon is essentially for future missions, showing that they can safely return soil samples or even astronauts back home after a lunar mission. In September, the Indian spacecraft was put into sleeping mode. The 14-day-long lunar night was approaching, and the spacecraft wasn't designed to collect scientific data during this period of time. So far, we've learned about a few major findings of the mission. One is related to measuring the temperature of the moon's topsoil at different depths. Intriguingly, the surface of the satellite in that region turned out to be hotter than expected. It was believed that the temperature could be between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, but it was around 158 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than it should be. The other discovery indicates the presence of several chemical elements, including oxygen. Besides, the data received from the spacecraft confirms the presence of aluminum, calcium, iron, titanium, silicon, and other chemical elements on the lunar surface close to the South Pole. The rover also used special instruments designed to measure quakes and rumbles beneath the lunar surface to detect some seismic activity. It brings us back to the sulfur detected thanks to the rover's spectroscope. Scientists are currently working on figuring out whether this element formed on the surface in a natural way or whether it's the result of volcanic activity or a meteor strike. Another astonishing thing found on the moon is a rock, and it may be the oldest known Earth rock. A 0.7-inch wide chip included in a large rock collection brought to our planet by Apollo astronauts might actually be a 4-billion-year-old fragment of Earth. This finding could help us paint a better picture of the intense pounding early Earth got at the dawn of its life. It could go like this. Soon after the rock formed, an asteroid impact might have blasted it from Earth. At that time, our planet's satellite was 3 times closer to Earth than it is today. The collision was so powerful that this chunk of terrestrial rock found its way to the moon. Later, this fragment got engulfed in a lunar breccia, a motley kind of rock. Eventually, the rock was brought back home to Earth by Apollo 14 astronauts. Even though scientists had found meteorites coming from Mars and the moon before, it was the first time a rock from the moon turned out to be a terrestrial meteorite. They also found out that the rock had formed in a water-rich environment at temperatures and pressures corresponding to those at around 12 miles beneath the surface of our planet. In 2019, China's Chang'e 4 mission made history by landing on the far side of the moon. The mission's rover helped researchers visualize structures hidden deep below the surface of the satellite, revealing billions of years of lunar history. The Yutu-2 rover made this discovery with the help of its lunar-penetrating radar. It imaged deep into the moon's surface and listened to echoes of sound bouncing back off structures hidden from view under the surface of the moon. It turned out those structures were resting at depths of almost 1,000 feet. The research suggests that the first 130 feet under the surface are made up of layers of dust, soil, and rocks. The instruments also discovered a concealed crater that must have formed after a large object slammed into the moon's surface. Long, long ago, ancient lava was likely to be flowing deep underground. Researchers believe that the broken rocks around the formation might be debris produced by the impact. They also found that the volcanic rock layers were thinner the closer they were to the surface. Such a thickness variation of lava flows might mean a decrease in the number and magnitude of eruptions over time. So, lunar volcanic activity gradually dwindled since the moon's formation around 4.5 billion years ago. On the far side of the moon, there is one of the largest and oldest impact craters in our solar system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. Unfortunately, from Earth, you can only see its outer rim, which looks like a huge chain of mountains. It's a ginormous 8-mile deep dent, stretching for more than 1,500 miles in diameter and covering 1/4 of the moon's surface. Astronomers are sure that this crater appeared when an asteroid collided with the moon around 4 billion years ago. And now, look at this gigantic chunk of metal the size of 4 states of Connecticut. As for its weight in pounds, it's enough to say that the number contains 18 zeros. This mysterious mass is hidden about 180 miles under the moon's surface, somewhere in the middle of the South Pole Aitken Basin. It was discovered when GRAIL, which stands for NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory mission, gathered data about our natural satellite. When examining this information, scientists noticed that in one place on the moon's surface, there was a weird change in gravity. After researching this phenomenon, they concluded that something mysterious was weighing down the basin floor there. So far, researchers haven't figured out the origin of the bizarre lump, but there are several theories. One of them claims that the finding is a chunk of dense oxide, which appeared when the moon was just taking its shape. At that time, the satellite was still covered with ancient oceans of magma, and the lump could be formed at the final stages of its cooling. However, most scientists support another theory, according to which the puzzling mass is part of the giant asteroid that once created the South Pole Aitken Basin. Since the thing is metallic, it's probably the iron-nickel core of the asteroid. There might be a labyrinth of lava tubes on the moon. Not so long ago, astronomers received the results of underground topography and discovered a massive cave under the surface of Earth's satellite. It could be the result of the lunar volcanic activity that happened more than 3 billion years ago. Streams of lava hardened, creating a thick, hard crust on the outside. But inside, it kept flowing, melting the rock and creating tunnels and caves. Numerous small pits in the moon's surface discovered by NASA seem to be the openings to such lava tubes. If this theory is confirmed, the underground tunnels might serve not only as a convenient location for human crewed space missions, but also as much-needed water sources for astronauts.
Our moon exploration project started out in 1969. Sure, there have been some problems along the way, but astronomers are certain we'll get back up there pretty soon and with better knowledge and technology. However, there's an 800-year-old trick that might become way more useful than fancy GPS tech and powerful rockets. It's called the Fibonacci sphere. Some scientists at a Hungarian university stumbled upon this idea while studying the moon. They believe it might be useful to better understand how the moon spins and how it's a bit squished while it goes around Earth. You might believe that our planet and its satellite are these perfect little spheres floating in space. Well, that's not true. They are in fact like slightly deflated soccer balls because of all the gravity, rotating movements, and tides. The GPS technology we use here on Earth is already adapted to these less than perfect ball proportions. Remember, our planet is a bit flattened at its poles. If we're going to make a map system for the moon, we need to do the same for its shape, called a solenoid, or what scientists call the moon's version of our Earth's shape. Since the moon is less compressed than our planet, scientists have been taking a shortcut until now. They've been looking at our satellite as a simple ball shape. However, with all these new projects coming up in the following decades and even some exciting trips we might end up having on the moon, we need to be more precise. Scientists now believe we should get the real data and start drawing an accurate picture of the moon. Here's where the Fibonacci sphere comes in handy. It's a clever solution that's been used by mathematicians to spread points out evenly on a ball. Scientists recently used it to map around 100,000 spots on the moon using data previously collected by NASA. And what they found was crucial for our understanding of the moon's shape. For instance, we now know that our satellite's poles are about 0.3 miles closer to the center compared to the moon's equator. Sure, it might seem like a tiny detail, but if we adjust our GPS software accordingly before we land on the moon again, it might save us from getting lost up there. This level of math hasn't been done since the 60s for the moon, but we already know it works wonders here at home, so it only makes scientists better prepared for future missions. This isn't the first time people have used Fibonacci's findings to come up with clever solutions. We've also seen it put to work in finance, agriculture, and in computer science. Let's see where it all came from. Legend has it that the Italian mathematician Fibonacci wasn't really that interested in mathematical sequences at first, but rather in rabbits? So, he came up with this interesting puzzle. What happens if you place a pair of rabbits in a certain space for a year? He also set some theoretical rules. For starters, all those bunnies come in boy-girl pairs, and they can start reproducing after just a month. Each month, each bunny pair adds one more pair of bunny offspring. The last rule was that all bunnies would be invincible for the year. Doing the math, he got this series of numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. If you look at this series again, you'll notice that every number is the sum of the two before it. The first two, that's your starting bunny pair. Next, you'll see the number 2, which is the first pair and their first offspring pair. Word caught on about this interesting sequence. and math lovers began studying it more closely. They started seeing this pattern very often in nature, like in how leaves grow on a plant or how seeds arrange on sunflowers. There's even a little experiment you can do to check it out. Start by grabbing some paper and a pen. Try drawing the Fibonacci spiral. Start with a tiny circle, then go bigger and bigger using those Fibonacci numbers. The first circle should just be a tiny dot on the paper, or the equivalent of 0. Next circle, 1 unit. Another circle, still 1 unit. Keep it going and you'll see that the circles form this spiral pattern. Even as it continues to grow, it keeps its shape. You might have also stumbled upon the Fibonacci spiral as a symbol of hypnosis. In all fairness, there's little evidence you can confuse someone by making them stare into a spiral for a while. But its effects on our focus and our optic nerves can't be ignored. After you've stared at a spinning spiral, you might see how objects get smaller or bigger depending on the direction of the swirl. It's easy to understand why some experience this sensation as hypnotizing. This interesting series of numbers appears in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't notice it. It can also be used in more practical instances, like converting miles to kilometers. Let's look at the series 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Pick any two numbers side by side. Say 13 and 21. Do the calculations and you'll notice that 13 miles is about 21 kilometers. Same with 34 and 55. Music and math might not seem like they're connected. But if you had asked the great Mozart, he probably wouldn't have agreed. It seems he was very passionate about numbers from early on in his career. He loved finding cool number patterns in music, like some sort of hidden messages. His own sister even remembered him doodling math all the time, even on the sides of his music sheets. Some scholars believe he might have even played around with the Fibonacci numbers. If that's really the case, then he might have used the ration to balance out parts of his tunes. What about other types of art? Well, it's also said that Leonardo da Vinci used the golden ratio in his masterpieces, like the Vitruvian Man and the Mona Lisa. Also, when it comes to great pieces of architecture, the Parthenon might have used this pattern too. Anytime you see buildings with columns spaced just right, you can be certain that's where the builders drew inspiration from. The Great Pyramid of Giza is another great example. There's no official record to prove it, but the pyramid's shape is so close to the golden ratio that it's kind of obvious. You'll also see this pattern appearing naturally in our environment. Go out in our garden and check to see if you have any pine cones lying around. See those scales? They're set up in a pattern according to the Fibonacci sphere. Even the bones in our body seem to be growing based on the same proportions. We've got one torso, one head, and one heart. Then there's stuff that comes in pairs. Our arms, legs, eyes, and ears, for instance. For the number 3, think about the composition of our limbs and the 3 main sections in our hand. The wrist part, the middle palm part, and our fingers, which are also split into 3, by the way. Oh, speaking of fingers, their bone lengths have this ratio too. This design helps our fingers move smoothly, especially when grabbing objects. The Fibonacci sequence can be seen in the way ocean waves curve, and how rivers split and flow too. Weather patterns can also follow this rule. Some whirlpools and hurricanes form and spread out in the same way the Fibonacci spiral does. Zoom out, and you'll see that spirals aren't just found here on Earth. They're also everywhere in space, and it isn't random. Most galaxies, including our Milky Way, are spirals. Think of it like this. Generally, stars in a young galaxy don't all appear at once. Some are faster when developing, others take their time. This makes gravity pull in different ways, making the young galaxy spin like a disk. As it spins, different levels of gravity stretch it into getting these spiral arms. On the flip side, if all the stars in a young galaxy appear at the same time, gravity just smushes it all into an egg shape, or what the astronomers call elliptical.
Okay, I officially give up on the hope that the moon is made of cheese after all. Wow, not even Gouda. The shiny lunar ball, or a curved banana, or half of a coin, depending on what phase it's in, has different layers inside, just like Earth. One of these layers is called the inner core. About 20 years ago, scientists were observing how the moon rotates. Using that data, they concluded that it had a fluid outer core, but the inner core was hard to study, so they didn't know if it was solid like a rock or molten like a hot liquid. But things are clearer now. Astronomers have collected data from different missions, including the Apollo missions, where astronauts went to the moon and gathered information themselves. Plus, they've used a special technique called seismic data. This method is all about studying how sound waves move through things. Take earthquakes on our planet as an example. When an earthquake happens, it creates waves that travel through the ground. Scientists can detect and analyze these waves to learn more about Earth's interior. The same idea can apply to other objects in our solar system, or planets, or, in this case, the moon. When quakes or moonquakes happen, they generate sound waves, and by carefully listening to and studying these waves, scientists can create a detailed map of what's inside the object. They can figure out things like different layers, what they're made of, and how they're arranged. To check the moon's deep interior, scientists also use something called laser ranging. This method measures the distance between the surface of the Earth and the moon very precisely. And ta-da! Our natural satellite's inner core is a dense, solid ball made of iron, just like Earth's. It's about 310 miles wide, which is nearly 15% the size of the entire moon. Researchers also have stumbled upon evidence that supports the theory that the layer between the moon's surface and its core, called the mantle, has been moving around as the moon evolved over time. This movement is something we call lunar mantle overturn, and it could explain why we find elements rich in iron on the lunar surface. Mantle material ends up being carried upward, and the volcanic rock remains in the moon's crust. Some of the materials in this rock were too dense, like me, so they just sank back through the lighter crust material all the way to the core mantle boundary. It's like a cycle where the moon's mantle material goes up during volcanic activity, carries iron-rich elements to the surface, and then sinks back down. There's another mystery scientists have been trying to solve. What caused the moon's magnetic field to weaken and nearly disappear over time? It seems that now that we know about the iron core and the global mantle overturn, we might get some more answers about the moon's magnetic field. Knowing what the inner core is like can help us better understand the moon's history as well as the history of our entire solar system. Now, one of the theories that's widely accepted about the origin of the moon says there was a massive collision between Earth in its early stages and another mysterious object in our solar system. It's called the Large Impact Theory, and this collision was so strong it ripped off a big chunk of the primitive molten Earth. I mean, not so big compared to what's left. If you put a US nickel next to a green pea, you get a good idea of how big our planet is compared to the moon. Now, this chunk was set into orbit around our planet, and this might have happened about 95 million years after our solar system formed. The object that collided with Earth could have been about 10% the mass of our home planet and roughly the size of Mars. Well, it makes sense. Earth and the Moon do have similar compositions after all. Of course, there are other ideas about how the Moon formed. One says that the gravitational force of our planet captured it. This means that the Moon was just an object innocently passing by when suddenly it got attracted and pulled into Earth's orbit. There's even a hypothesis that Earth stole the Moon from Venus. Ooh. In that case, the Moon shouldn't complain. I guess the view is way better here. So yeah, the Moon and Earth are similar when it comes to rocks and some minerals. But the Moon doesn't have the same atmosphere as our planet. Its atmosphere is thin and consists of some weird gases that include potassium and sodium, which is not something you can find in the atmosphere of Mars, Venus, or Earth. And the rocks on the Moon don't contain water. But that doesn't mean there's no water at all up there. A long time ago, in the 17th century, astronomers saw large dark spots on the Moon's surface. One of these astronomers thought these spots looked like oceans, and he called them Maria, which means seas in Latin. Other astronomers also made maps of the Moon, and they used the term Maria to describe these dark spots. For example, Mare Tranquillitatis translates to Sea of Tranquility, where Apollo 11 made its touchdown. But it seems those dark spots are not actually oceans. They are plains made of hardened lava that erupted long ago. These volcanic eruptions left behind smooth flat areas called basalt plains. In the late 1800s, one sky watcher studied the moon and found it didn't have an atmosphere. Without an atmosphere, there are no clouds and no air to keep water from evaporating. So scientists thought that any water on the moon would just disappear right away. They believed the moon was totally dry. But then, in 1961, one physicist had a different idea. He pointed out there could be water on the moon in special areas called permanently shadowed regions. These are spots on the moon where the sun doesn't shine, so they stay dark all the time. Water ice could exist in these dark areas because they're extremely cold and the ice wouldn't evaporate. But when astronauts from the Apollo missions went to the moon, they brought back soil samples, and scientists found no signs of water in them. So everyone went back to thinking that the moon was completely dry. In the 90s, NASA focused on these shadowed craters and found high concentrations of hydrogen, which meant there could be ice at the moon's poles. They still weren't certain, so they kept digging and, after a while, found hydrogen trapped inside tiny beads of volcanic glass. Since there are no active volcanoes on the moon today, which means water probably was present on the moon when these volcanoes erupted long ago. Plus, there could be way more water back in the early days of our moon. In 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission showed us what we'd been looking for a really long time. There is water on the moon after all. It turns out the water is hidden within the grains of lunar dust or sticking to the surface in the sunlit areas of the moon. So there are no oceans like we have on Earth, but at least there's something. The question remains, how did water even get there? It seems the moon had a chaotic history back at the time when it was forming, as probably most of the planets and moons in our solar system. So there is some evidence that water came there from comets hitting its surface back in the old days, or maybe even keeps on coming from those that are slamming into the moon right now. We're talking about a chaotic situation where icy micrometeorites collide with the moon's surface, and dust then makes an even bigger mess when interacting with the solar wind. But we're waiting to find out more about this. Because, as we all know, when you mention water, you also inevitably talk about life. That's why we want to know more, for instance, about all that ice hidden in polar craters on the moon. Maybe it can teach us more about how life developed on Earth. Maybe comets brought all the necessary elements here. Then, what if there are some of those elements stuck in the ice on the moon, too?
Technological progress does not stand still, and over the past decade, the resolution of images of the lunar surface has improved greatly. Many pits have been discovered on the surface, and some of them are really impressive in size. The largest are hundreds of feet deep. However, technology is not yet advanced enough for us to study the bottom of such pits in detail. That's why a recent discovery is surprising. It turns out that huge pits can extend deep into the rock of the moon. It's a groundbreaking discovery. Let's figure out why. So look at this giant underground cave. Leonardo Carrere and Lorenzo Bruzone from the University of Trento were thrilled to finally confirm the existence of such structures on the moon. They analyzed images taken by the mini RF instrument on board the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2010. The original images didn't have excellent resolution, so the authors had to do a huge amount of work, using modern data analysis and modeling techniques. But first things first, why does it all matter so much? Well, instead of building homes on the surface of the moon, we might be able to live inside these natural caves. They could offer protection from dangerous things like harmful space radiation, extreme temperature swings, and even meteorites. According to planetary geologist Wes Patterson from Johns Hopkins, even though we'd still have to bring materials from Earth to make those caves habitable, using them would be a lot easier and cheaper than building bases on the surface. Based on the collected data, the cave is about 150 feet wide and up to 260 feet long, which is just a bit smaller than a football field. It's located in a deep pit called the Mare Tranquillitatis Pit, which likely formed when an ancient lava tube collapsed. Although the moon has no active volcanoes today, billions of years ago, its surface was covered with lava that flowed through valleys, carving out these tubes below the surface. Over time, some of the lava tubes became unstable and collapsed, creating pits like the one in question. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, has already found more than 200 of such pits on the moon. It means there could be hundreds of hidden caves waiting to be explored on our satellite. When publishing their findings in Nature Astronomy, the researchers suggested that the caves could offer future astronauts a safe place to live and work, protecting them from the moon's extreme conditions. And extreme they are. One of the biggest challenges of living on the moon is its temperatures. The lunar surface gets extremely hot during the day, reaching about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the temperature drops below minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit at night. But inside the caves, the temperature could stay much more consistent. A separate study done in 2022 used computer simulations to predict that some of those caves could maintain a comfortable temperature of about 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Much easier to manage, right? Unfortunately, getting to the caves won't be easy. The Mare Tranquillitatis cave is over 400 feet below the surface, at the bottom of a steep slope covered in loose debris. It would take some clever engineering to get up and down that slope. The options could be using jetpacks, a lunar elevator, or some other kind of technology. We must find a way to transport astronauts safely. There's also a lot more to discover. Radar technology could help scientists find even more caves and lava tubes on the moon. In the future, a spacecraft with higher resolution radar could even map the insides of the pits that LRO has already found. According to the researchers, this kind of complete survey could help them figure out the best locations for future lunar bases and other explorations. And there's another potential bonus. Those caves could contain water. Scientists have already found frozen water on the moon, under the surface, and in permanently shadowed craters. Tiny amounts are also scattered across the lunar dirt. Water is a critical resource for any moon base, and finding it in the caves could make the idea of living there even more realistic. All in all, this discovery could be a game changer for lunar exploration. Living in natural caves on the moon might be a more practical and safer option than building something on the surface. It could also bring us one step closer to making the moon a place where humans can live and work for the long term. Technological progress does not stand still, and over the past decade, the resolution of images of the lunar surface has improved greatly. Many pits have been discovered on the surface, and some of them are really impressive in size. The largest are hundreds of feet deep. However, technology is not yet advanced enough for us to study the bottom of such pits in detail. That's why a recent discovery is surprising. It turns out that huge pits can extend deep into the rock of the moon. It's a groundbreaking discovery. Let's figure out why. So look at this giant underground cave. Leonardo Carrere and Lorenzo Bruzone from the University of Trento were thrilled to finally confirm the existence of such structures on the moon. They analyzed images taken by the mini RF instrument on board the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2010. The original images didn't have excellent resolution, so the authors had to do a huge amount of work, using modern data analysis and modeling techniques. But first things first, why does it all matter so much? Well, instead of building homes on the surface of the moon, we might be able to live inside these natural caves. They could offer protection from dangerous things like harmful space radiation, extreme temperature swings, and even meteorites. According to planetary geologist Wes Patterson from Johns Hopkins, even though we'd still have to bring materials from Earth to make those caves habitable, using them would be a lot easier and cheaper than building bases on the surface. Based on the collected data, the cave is about 150 feet wide and up to 260 feet long, which is just a bit smaller than a football field. It's located in a deep pit called the Mare Tranquillitatis pit, which likely formed when an ancient lava tube collapsed. Although the moon has no active volcanoes today, billions of years ago, its surface was covered with lava that flowed through valleys, carving out these tubes below the surface. Over time, some of the lava tubes became unstable and collapsed, creating pits like the one in question. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, has already found more than 200 of such pits on the moon. It means there could be hundreds of hidden caves waiting to be explored on our satellite. When publishing their findings in Nature Astronomy, the researchers suggested that the caves could offer future astronauts a safe place to live and work, protecting them from the moon's extreme conditions. And extreme they are. One of the biggest challenges of living on the moon is its temperatures. The lunar surface gets extremely hot during the day, reaching about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the temperature drops below minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit at night. But inside the caves, the temperature could stay much more consistent. A separate study done in 2022 used computer simulations to predict that some of those caves could maintain a comfortable temperature of about 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Much easier to manage, right? Unfortunately, getting to the caves won't be easy. The Mare Tranquillitatis cave is over 400 feet below the surface, at the bottom of a steep slope covered in loose debris. It would take some clever engineering to get up and down that slope. The options could be using jetpacks, a lunar elevator, or some other kind of technology. We must find a way to transport astronauts safely. There's also a lot more to discover. Radar technology could help scientists find even more caves and lava tubes on the moon. In the future, a spacecraft with higher resolution radar could even map the insides of the pits that LRO has already found. According to the researchers, this kind of complete survey could help them figure out the best locations for future lunar bases and other explorations. And there's another potential bonus. Those caves could contain water. Scientists have already found frozen water on the moon, under the surface, and in permanently shadowed craters. Tiny amounts are also scattered across the lunar dirt. Water is a critical resource for any moon base, and finding it in the caves could make the idea of living there even more realistic. All in all, this discovery could be a game changer for lunar exploration. Living in natural caves on the moon might be a more practical and safer option than building something on the surface. It could also bring us one step closer to making the moon a place where humans can live and work for the long term.
Neil Armstrong had been getting ready for his mission on the moon for over 3 years. To resist microgravity conditions, he had to learn how to walk sideways by being strapped and suspended at an angle in trying to walk along walls. His limits were tested through an intense diet and sleep regimen, since in space he would only have beef and vegetables, previously dehydrated and stuffed into a package. Back in the day, astronauts had to experience the desert, jungle, open sea, and Arctic survival training. These days, it's a lot more structured. But back then, it was more of a let's drop this person in the middle of nowhere with no supplies and see if they make it. Before landing on the moon, he had to gather and study rock samples in the Grand Canyon, explore ancient volcano formations in the Nevada National Security Site, and look into gas and lava vents, lava lakes, and pit craters in various locations in Hawaii. On July 20th, 1969, Armstrong was given a hearty breakfast before blastoff. Steak, eggs, toast, juice, and coffee. He received what doctors call a low-residue meal, which means he wouldn't have to go to the bathroom soon after. It took him 109 hours and 42 minutes to reach the surface of the moon, in an area called the Sea of Tranquility. He had to travel 240,000 miles to get there. The crew could have gone for the Ocean of Storms or the Central Bay, but this place was chosen for landing because it had good visibility, was relatively smooth, and was easily reachable with as little propellant as possible. When he was at about 500 feet above the surface of the moon, Armstrong had to maneuver the spacecraft manually to make sure they wouldn't land in a dangerous crater. He continued to hover for about a minute and a half, moving it sideways until he felt comfortable to land. As soon as his device landed safely, he immediately radioed to Mission Control, located in Houston, Texas. The now famous message,
"The Eagle has landed."
Steadily, he went down the Lunar's module's ladder, while a television camera was attached to the craft to record his progress. The camera also transmitted the signal back to Earth, where hundreds of millions of people were anxiously waiting. At precisely 10:56 p.m. EDT on the same day, Armstrong placed his feet onto the lunar soil, saying,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
The schedule said that the astronaut needed to sleep before the first moonwalk, but he chose to go outside earlier than planned, since he obviously couldn't sleep. If Armstrong had walked on the moon without special equipment to breathe, he would have smelled a weird odor, sort of musty and sulfuric. Still, he had the chance to smell it when he returned to the lunar module. The thing is, the dirt had clung to his feet, so the odor spread all over the cabin. He described it as wet fireplace ashes, or how the air smells after fireworks shows. Who would have thought you needed to pack a scented candle when going to the moon? Apart from the people that have since made it to the moon, no one ever got the chance to know precisely what the crew was smelling. Even during that first mission, when moon soil and rock samples were transported to labs in airtight containers, once they were opened back on Earth, surprisingly, the smell was gone. He also felt the surface of the moon to be fine and powdery, but said he had no difficulty in moving around. One other member of his crew joined him about 20 minutes later. The whole moonwalk took a little over 2 hours. During this time, Armstrong and his teammates set up various devices on the surface of our satellite. One was meant to precisely measure the exact distance from there to Earth, by timing how long it took for a laser beam to travel from Earth to the lunar surface and back. Another meant to measure moonquakes and potential meteor impacts, which leads us to the discovery that the moon was pretty alive after all. We know today that the largest moonquakes are much weaker than the largest earthquakes, though their movements can last for up to an hour, way longer than on Earth. They managed to gather somewhere around 50 pounds of rock and soil samples. They also snapped many photographs of the terrain, where they also planted a US flag. The astronaut even got the chance to catch up with President Richard Nixon, for less than a minute though. The final thing on the list for Armstrong was to go for a walk to what is now known as East Crater, 65 yards east of the lunar module. It was the greatest distance traveled from the spacecraft on that specific mission, approximately the length of half a football field. As soon as his tasks were done, Armstrong went back into the lunar module and safely closed the hatch to get some sleep. While preparing for liftoff, Armstrong and his crew discovered that, because of their chunky spacesuits, they managed to break the ignition switch for the ascent engine. No big deal, they thought. So they used a part of a pen to push in the circuit breaker to start the launch sequence. At 1:54 p.m., the famous Eagle began to ascend. Apart from the scientific equipment installed on the surface of the moon, a plaque was also left there. It read, "Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." Years later, Armstrong said that NASA limited their time on the moon because they didn't know how the spacesuits would handle the moon's extreme temperatures, as high as 260 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, to as low as 280 degrees Fahrenheit below zero at night. Things got a bit more complicated when Armstrong landed back on Earth, since he had been exposed to unknown space particles. The result? He and his team had to be placed in planetary protection quarantine on their return, as soon as their space capsule safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th. That specific quarantine for the Apollo 11 astronauts is one of the reasons why we have microwaves in our kitchens today. When they first returned from the moon, they initially spent their first few days in a mobile quarantine facility, or MQF. Sure, the MQF featured comfortable chairs, bunks, a toilet, and showers, but it didn't leave a lot of space for fancy cooking. Since there was no room for a standard oven or grill, and to also reduce the potential fires that might have occurred, NASA had to get creative. That's how the original countertop microwave oven was developed, to easily help astronauts get their meals without the hustle of a fully equipped kitchen. These days you can see that first microwave in a museum in Oakland, California. After returning to Earth, Armstrong claimed he would never reach for the stars again. But he didn't stop exploring though. Back in 1985, he joined a professional team of other greatest explorers to the North Pole. He was joined by mountaineer Edmund Hillary, aviator Steve Fawcett, and photographer Patrick Morrow. reaching the pole on April 6, 1985. Armstrong claimed he wanted to see what the Earth's icy pole looked like from the ground, since he had only seen it from the surface of the Moon. The Apollo 11 mission was nevertheless unforgettable for Armstrong since. In 2015, the Smithsonian Institution uncovered that he had kept hidden a cloth bag full of small parts from the lunar module. It included his waist tether, some utility lights and their brackets, an emergency wrench, and the optical sight that was mounted above Armstrong's window of the space module. It also contained the data acquisition camera that recorded the iconic footage of Armstrong taking his small step on the Moon. Armstrong kept it to himself for many years, until his widow, Carol, eventually found it. He even kept it a secret from his official biographer, who had many times asked if he had kept any memorabilia from his famous mission. He didn't sneak those objects back on Earth, though. He just mentioned it to be a bunch of trash he wanted to bring back.
About a century ago, people envisioned the 21st century as a time filled with quirky inventions. They weren't far off the mark. We're now one step closer to establishing an actual settlement on the Moon. Before we can create a new home up, we need to find a way to stay connected, beyond just transportation and shipping. Being able to send a simple text, even something as casual as, "Hey, how are you?" is essential. We can't move to the Moon if we're cut off from Earth. Let me spill some tea. A lunar 4G network is currently being developed. The company leading this initiative is none other than Nokia's Bell Labs. The company, bought by the world-famous Finnish company that started out as a paper mill in the 19th century and later ventured into the cell phone industry, creating iconic devices long before Apple launched its first phone. Once the network is completed, it will be loaded onto a lander, deployed, and connected using specialized radio equipment. But don't think this is just a fun experiment. It has significant purposes. The Lunar Outpost rover, one of the vehicles involved in this mission, will thoroughly explore an area known as the Shackleton Connecting Ridge. Another rover, the Micronova, will investigate a lunar crater in search of ice. When they discover ice and capture images, this information will be first transmitted to the lander and then relayed to Earth, an unprecedented achievement in history. Moreover, the importance of a reliable phone connection cannot be overstated. Currently, astronauts communicate via radio. But NASA aims to establish a lunar communication system capable of supporting high-resolution video. Effective communication during space missions is as crucial as food and water, and with this new lunar 4G technology, video calls on the Moon could soon become a reality. Plus, thanks to Lunar 4G, we'll be able to track how the endangered species sent to the Moon are doing. Oh, sorry, I completely forgot to mention something important. As more species edge closer to extinction today, scientists are collecting samples from animals, plants, and other organisms to store in biorepositories around the globe. Unfortunately, the conditions on Earth are far from ideal for these modern-day Noah's Arks. Hence, the decision to build 1 or 2 vaults on the Moon makes perfect sense. On the Moon, there's a permanently shadowed region at its south pole. It may seem like a fortunate coincidence, but some lunar craters may meet the criterion of temperature, -320 degrees Fahrenheit, which is precisely what we need for long-term self-storage. Initially, the plan was to construct the vault in lava tubes that run beneath the Moon's surface, but that would have posed significant risks. This design requires a special solar-powered cooling system, and any accidental loss of power could be catastrophic, resulting in the destruction of all the samples. However, if we built it in a forever frozen shadowed area, the vault wouldn't need any energy or human maintenance. Bingo! It sounds almost too good to be true, and indeed there are several complications. For instance, dust is an omnipresent issue on the Moon, infiltrating everything. If the storage requires seals, a dust mitigation system must be developed, which has not yet been created. So for now, it remains a theoretical concept rather than a practical solution.
40, 50 feet, why don't you turn around and let them get a view from there and...
I know you want to learn about real things, not just concepts. Here's something real for you. The moon is full of human waste, carefully packed into bags. According to estimates, there are around 96 of these bags you'd probably prefer to never open. But you never know what exactly is hidden inside. It could be any product of the human body out there. So, if we ever make it to the moon and you accidentally stumble upon a mysterious bag, my advice is to resist the urge to open it. Instead, you can hand it over to scientists. They say they're eager to get their hands on them. Humans are incredible, in a rather unfortunate way. We haven't even established a proper settlement on the moon yet, but there's already around 200 tons of junk scattered about. It piles up there as if it were a teenager's room rather than a celestial body. Alongside those rather unappealing human waste bags, you'll also find cameras, drills, towels, brushes, rakes, a multitude of other technical items, and surprisingly, a falcon's feather. I'll explain that in a moment. At the end of Apollo 15's final moonwalk, David Scott pulled out a falcon's feather and a hammer to demonstrate Galileo's theory that in the absence of air resistance, different objects fall at the same rate. Amidst all that junk, there's an actual piece of art, so we could say that the moon, if it doesn't have the very first art museum, at least boasts a small exhibition. The crew of Apollo 15 took a 3.5-inch tall aluminum figure to the moon. Created by a Belgian artist, it's called the Fallen Astronaut, and it was laid on its side with a plaque listing the names of astronauts and cosmonauts who contributed to exploration. But the list of odd objects on the moon doesn't end there. If you ever find yourself in need of cash, you can find it on the moon, since a stack of $2 bills was simply forgotten there. Yep, a lot of material has been collected since 1969, when humans first stepped on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Our natural satellite was first seen in a telescope in 1609. But what about its true age? To understand that, we need to start with how the moon first formed. Back in the mid-80s, a conference in Hawaii brought together a bunch of scientists to figure out where the moon came from. They came up with a pretty cool idea. The moon probably formed with the stuff that our planet Earth donated. Picture this. A Mars-sized object crashed into the early Earth, flinging molten materials into space, which eventually came together to become the moon we see today. This theory clears up a lot of mysteries. For instance, it used to baffle folks why the moon has such a small iron core. The answer is simple. It formed from Earth's outer layer, which isn't rich in iron. And that pale crust of the moon? It's just minerals that floated to the top when the molten moon cooled down. At first, the moon was super close to Earth, but it's been slowly drifting away at about 2 inches a year, even while you're watching this video. Figuring out when this all went down, though, is a bit tricky. The Apollo astronauts brought back a bunch of moon rocks, which helped scientists estimate their ages. The oldest ones are around 4.35 billion years old, which is about 200 million years after the solar system kicked off. So, here's the thing. There's no exact date for when the moon formed, but there are several interesting theories. One idea is that the age of these rocks could mean the moon is around 4.35 billion years old. But some scientists who look at how planets form think that most of the material in the early solar system came together way before that 200 million year mark. They argue that a big impact that created the moon happening that late seems pretty unlikely, which means the moon could actually be older than 3.5 billion years. Another interesting thought is that the moon might have gone through some serious heating events as it moved away from Earth. This is similar to what happens on Io, one of Jupiter's supervolcanic moons. The gravitational pull from a bigger body can stretch and compress a smaller one, generating heat, like when you squeeze a rubber ball. The rocks on both Io and the Moon warm up this way. Rocks have radioactive elements that act like internal clocks, helping scientists figure out their ages. The catch is, if the Moon heats up too much, it resets those clocks and only starts keeping time again once it cools down. So those rocks that are about 4.35 billion years old might not actually mark the Moon's birthday. They could just indicate a time of tidal heating. This suggests, once again, that the Moon had to have formed even earlier than that.
Time can stretch or shrink depending on where you are. Climb to the top of an extremely high mountain, and time will pass a teeny tiny bit faster than if you were down in a valley. That's all because of gravity and how it affects time. We hardly notice it in our everyday life, but for scientists and space agencies preparing to send people to the Moon, these minuscule differences in time really do matter. We'll get to answer the why question a bit later. Right now, a new space race is underway. Many countries want to establish long-term bases on the Moon. With humans up there, things like reliable timekeeping become crucial. The thing is, the Moon doesn't operate on Earth's time. A day on the Moon runs slightly faster than a day on Earth. The difference is about 56 microseconds, and it seems insignificant. But over time, even such a difference can add up, creating bigger issues. So, to keep lunar missions running smoothly and prevent things from drifting out of sync, NASA and scientists around the world are now dealing with a tricky challenge, creating an entirely new lunar timescale. NASA is supposed to start using it by 2026. It's the same year they hope to send astronauts back to the Moon for the first time in 50 years. But this new timescale is not just a Moon time zone. It's actually an entire system that will adjust for the Moon's faster time and keep everything synchronized with Earth's time systems. Only in this case will missions be able to run smoothly. You see, on Earth our timekeeping is already surprisingly complicated. It might seem like time should be a straightforward concept, but keeping accurate time is actually a precise science, especially when you consider how much timekeeping affects our daily lives. So, to keep global time coordinated, scientists rely on something called Coordinated Universal Time, also known as UTC. This global time standard is based on ultra-precise atomic clocks that scientists place in separate locations all over the world. Atomic clocks are cool because they measure time based on the consistent vibrations of atoms, so they're super stable and accurate. This helps scientists make sure UTC is the same for everyone everywhere. These atomic clocks also take into account that time moves slightly more slowly the closer you are to the center of our planet. So, atomic clocks positioned closer to the Earth's surface tick a bit more slowly due to stronger gravitational pull. This effect, explained by Einstein's theory of relativity, happens because gravity affects time. By spreading atomic clocks across different elevations, scientists average out all the tiny time differences caused by gravity. Also, for precise timekeeping, scientists occasionally add leap seconds to account for the small natural changes in Earth's rotation speed. It sounds pretty technical, but this process of keeping everyone on the same time helps make the modern world function. After all, precise timing is crucial for global trading, GPS navigation, and even internet communications. But time on the Moon works differently. Our natural satellite has a weaker gravitational field than Earth. That's why clocks on the Moon tick a bit faster. This difference means that lunar clocks are very likely to slowly drift away from Earth clocks if there's no correction. It can lead to big problems when astronauts need to keep in close contact with Earth or navigate around the lunar surface. NASA's solution is something called a lunar timescale. Scientists aren't going to adjust Moon clocks to match Earth exactly. Instead, they want to establish a unique system that measures lunar time accurately, but is also easy to convert back to Earth time. Think of it as creating a whole new framework just for the Moon. To make this lunar time system work, NASA is cooperating with international colleagues like the European Space Agency. Together, they're setting up what they call LunaNet. This lunar network will be a bit like the Internet for the Moon. It'll make sure all the lunar clocks work together and align with Earth-based time. Just like how atomic clocks around the world coordinate for UTC on Earth, clocks on the Moon will be part of this larger LunaNet network. Now, scientists are pretty experienced when it comes to managing time in space. Global Positioning System satellites, which orbit Earth about 12,550 miles high, have atomic clocks on board. These clocks tick faster than clocks on the Earth's surface because they're quite far away from Earth's gravitational pull. But then, how does GPS navigation stay accurate? It's because scientists have figured out ways to slow those clocks down to match Earth's time. This experience with GPS clocks is a great base for what scientists need to do on the Moon. In some ways, it might be even easier than managing GPS. Scientists can work with lunar clocks as they naturally are, instead of needing to adjust them to sync perfectly with Earth. By setting up accurate lunar time from the start, scientists hope to avoid some of the complications of managing GPS satellites. And now, here's the interesting part, or maybe more interesting. To keep lunar timekeeping a reality, NASA and its partners want to set up clocks both on the lunar surface and on satellites orbiting the Moon. Some of these clocks will be long-lasting atomic clocks, and others will be crystal oscillators. Those offer stability over short time periods. Together, these clocks will create a network that scientists will be able to rely on. Meanwhile, atomic clocks for space don't come cheap. They can cost a staggering few $1 million each. Luckily, crystal oscillators are more affordable, but they don't stay accurate over long periods. Once those clocks are set up, they'll work together as part of LunaNet, which will be NASA's framework for everything related to moon-based time and data networks. LunaNet will act like an internet for lunar operations. Different space agencies will contribute to it, like how internet service providers work for us on Earth. But there's another set of challenges, and it's connected with the Moon's rotation. Firstly, a day on the Moon lasts much longer than a day on our planet because it takes the Moon about 28 Earth days to make a full rotation. Plus, the Moon's equator experiences about 14 days of sunlight, followed by 14 days of darkness, unlike Earth's regular day-night cycle. And at the Moon's south pole, where NASA is going to establish future lunar missions, there are areas that stay lit or in shadow permanently. It might make it harder for astronauts to keep track of time. NASA and its partners hope to involve more countries in this project through international organizations, like the International Astronomical Union. The idea is to get as many countries as possible on board with the lunar timescale, so that everyone exploring the Moon is on the same page. Now, another really exciting thing about all this is that figuring out lunar time could help other future space missions, like trips to Mars. The experience and knowledge we'll get from setting up a lunar timescale are likely to serve as a blueprint for managing time on even farther planets. That's one of the reasons why scientists are taking this lunar project so seriously. As for astronauts living on the Moon, a consistent, reliable time system will be essential, not just for navigation, but for everything from scientific experiments to day-to-day activities. NASA's Lunar Time Project is truly groundbreaking. It's the first step toward managing time as humans expand farther into space. And if they get it right, it'll mean that future astronauts won't just have Earth time to guide them. They'll also have a Moon time, and even, one day, a Mars time too. Precise timekeeping matters both for the sake of scientifically understanding the passage of time on the Moon and for setting up all the infrastructure necessary to carry out missions. Scientists are also eager to create a timescale from scratch because they can take everything they've learned about timekeeping on Earth and apply it to a new